Water. Find water first. Those were the only words left in Chun Jin's mind when he regained consciousness. His throat burned with dryness, his tongue glued firmly to the roof of his mouth. He swallowed instinctively, drawing not a drop of saliva and triggering a fit of harsh coughing instead. He thought of the blue vacuum flask back in the warehouse duty room. He must have filled it to the brim the previous night. Or had it really been just last night? He stretched a hand out to his side in search of the flask, only to touch a sheet of solid ice. He clamped his jaw shut the instant his cough escaped him. Two faint scraping sounds drifted in from outside the door, dragging along the iron panel, like someone dragging the tip of a key back and forth across the door crack. Chun Jin pressed his cheek flat against the frigid metal floor, holding still instead of scrambling to his feet. The iron plating seared cold into his skin, numbing the entire left side of his face. He slid his eyes open slowly. Ice coated the ground beneath him. This was neither the concrete floor of the warehouse nor the peeling wooden planks of his dorm room. He was inside a train carriage. It was furnished with the paired bench seats typical of old green trains. The upholstery had split open, the exposed foam frozen into dull gray lumps. The overhead luggage rack hung crookedly with cracked welds. A stiff red scarf dangled from its edge. Wind stirred the scarf's frayed end, making it tap gently against the metal frame. Two faint ding sounds echoed through the carriage, sharp and grating on the nerves. Chun Jin's Adam's apple bobbed, a bitter dry taste coating his mouth. A rounded shape jutted out beneath the seat, roughly the size of a bottle base. He had just begun to shift toward it when a gust of cold air poured through the crack in the front, right door. Only then did he notice the door stood ajar with a 2-finger, wide gap. A blinding white blizzard stretched endlessly outside. No station platforms or railway tracks visible. Nothing but wind and snow flurries drifting inward. The snow settled on the floor without melting, forming a thin, icy film. The scraping noise came straight from beyond that narrow opening. Chun Jin tucked his hands beneath his torso. His mobile phone dug into his thigh through his trousers, yet he made no move to retrieve it. Working night shifts at the warehouse, he never checked his phone first when the back door creaked open. He always looked for a usable weapon. Nothing lay within reach except a shard of ice and a rigid, hard object half buried nearby. It was a human forearm, severed clean midway up the limb. The flesh had frozen a sickly blue-gray, its fingers still clenched tight around a crumpled sheet of paper. Chun Jin stared at the severed arm for 2 full seconds before swearing quietly and forcing his gaze away. Fixating on the corpse part would get him killed right now. If this carriage fell under his supervision, it would face an immediate shutdown for rectification on day 1. Broken doors, ice, covered floors, discarded severed limbs littering the space. Every hazard imaginable. The creature outside scraped against the metal once more, the sound sharper and closer this time, sending a faint tremor through the iron door frame. Chun Jin curled his right leg bit by bit, pressing the sole of his shoe against the door's bottom edge. The moment his foot braced into place, something rammed the door from the outside. The impact was mild, yet the door gap widened another fraction. Frigid wind wormed up his trouser legs, numbing the toes on his left foot completely. Bracing his back against a bench seat, Chun Jin drove his leg hard forward, forcing the door gap to shrink back by half a finger's width. The outward pressure against the door vanished for 2 or 3 heartbeats. He kept his back anchored to the bench, only easing the tension in his leg once no further impacts came from outside. He scanned the carriage. A half-collapsed travel bag sat under the left bench, its zipper frozen solid with no way to tell its contents. A bulge protruded from the bag's side, shaped exactly like a water bottle. His throat constricted again, the dry agony making spots dance across his vision. One handrail ahead had snapped clean off, bent and discarded on the floor. Further toward the door rested a rusted short pry bar, too worthless to fetch even scrap metal prices, yet far better than fighting unarmed. Chun Jin stretched his fingers to grab the bar, his fingertips just falling short when the monster slammed into the door again. A dull, heavy bang reverberated far louder than the previous blows. His foot slipped across the icy floor, prying the door open further as snow whipped into his face. Ignoring the stinging cold, he lurched half his body forward and seized hold of the pry bar. The second his skin brushed the rusted metal, lines of text materialized abruptly in his field of vision. Rusted pry bar corroded brittle, prone to snapping capable of prying thin iron sheet. He had barely processed the text when a pale gray nose forced its way through the door crack. Hairless, its skin cracked and flaking. The nostrils flared repeatedly as if it had caught his scent. Chun Jin jammed the pry bar horizontally into the gap to wedge the door shut. Fresh lines of writing popped into view the instant the bar locked the opening. One stat refresh available remaining fate points. 2 fainter lines hovered underneath the main text. Sharper cutting edge, but more fragile under force. Quieter during use, yet unable to budge stuck doors. Chen Jin nearly let out a bitter laugh reading the second option. He needed to pry the door closed for survival, not stand vigil over it silently as a caretaker. Sharper. His voice came out hoarse and cracked the second he spoke the word. Flakes of rust sloughed off the pry bar's curved head, revealing a dull gray metallic surface underneath. It was not polished or brand new, merely worn metal sharpened faintly like an old knife touched up on a grindstone. The monster pushed half its face through the crack moments later. It bore a loose resemblance to a dog, save for empty black eye sockets void of eyeballs. Its mouth split all the way to its jawline, bared teeth crammed with scraps of torn fabric. It made no vocal sounds whatsoever, and that silence was the worst part. No growls or snarls to warn of its incoming attacks. Chen Jin planted his left foot firmly to brace the door, wedging the curved end of the pry bar beneath the creature's upper jaw. Do not bash it bluntly. Blunt force will never break it open. That thought burned sharp in his mind. He had dealt with warped metal shelving at the warehouse using the same principle. Brute strength was always the dumbest solution. Find gaps, lodge leverage points, and apply controlled force. He pressed the pry bar downward hard. A sharp crack emanated first from the metal bar itself. A jolt of numbness shot up Chen Jin's wrist, even as the creature's jaw pried open slightly. Pale gray blood smeared across the door frame. The monster recoiled briefly before shoving its body inward once more. A claw shot through the gap and snagged the cuff of his trousers. Chen Jin glanced down at the trapped fabric. Pulling backward would only drag him toward the monster. He lifted his foot off the door brace and rolled his entire body sideways across the ice. The external pressure through the door opened a hand's breadth wide. The monster squeezed its torso through the gap, its shoulders wedged immovably in the doorway track. Chen Jin grabbed the broken handrail off the floor and jammed it into the door's lower sliding track. The door slammed to an abrupt halt, trapping the creature fast in place. It thrashed violently, its claws scraping deep, white gouges into the frozen floor. Chen Jin knelt on the ice, cold stabbing sharply through his kneecaps. He gripped the pry bar with both hands and drove its curved tip into the split flesh beneath the monster's jaw. The first stab slipped on the slick mixture of rust and blood coating the metal, the viscous residue creating a nauseatingly slippery surface. He wiped his palms against the fabric of his trousers and thrust the bar forward a second time. This time the broken tip of the pry bar pierced cleanly into the creature's neck. Gritting his molars tight against the pain, Chen Jin twisted the bar upward in a sharp, slicing motion. The pry bar snapped clean in his grip with a loud crack, and the monster's thrashing ceased entirely. He kept his weight pressed against its shoulder, counting slowly to 10 before releasing his hold. His right hand shook violently from extreme physical exertion, unable to maintain a grip even on the broken half of the pry bar. This was no dramatic, cinematic trembling, just involuntary muscle spasms after overexertion, his fingers refusing to follow his commands. He tried closing his fist around the broken bar twice, without success. Damn it, he muttered the curse under his breath, the quiet expletive easing some of his mounting tension. Leaning back against the bench seat, he reached to inspect the wound on his left calf. The claw had torn through his trouser leg and broken the skin, though the laceration was shallow. Blood seeped from the gash, freezing stiff against the fabric when hit by the frigid draft. Chen Jin fished a pack of paper tissues from his pocket and pressed them against the wound. The tissues quickly soaked through with blood and melted ice water, forcing him to layer on fresh sheets one after another. He could not afford to keep bleeding out, nor did he have time to dispose of the creature's body immediately. A fresh wave of scorching dryness flared in his throat. He licked his cracked lips, the faint metallic tang of blood only worsening his raging thirst. At that exact moment, static crackled from the loudspeaker mounted to the carriage ceiling, sounding just like a faulty old radio. Welcome aboard the Doomsday Train. The train will arrive at its first station in 7 hours. All passengers must replenish their fuel supplies promptly. Passengers depleted of fuel will be marked as derailed. Derailed individuals will receive no recourse. The broadcast cut off abruptly, the remainder of the sentence swallowed by harsh static interference. Chen Jin stared upward at the buzzing speaker. Really? You send the tutorial after I nearly get torn apart? The train's customer service left much to be desired. No response echoed through the empty carriage. Once his racing pulse steadied, he pulled out his mobile phone. The screen stayed pitch black with no reaction to a long power press. His keys, a lighter, and his staff ID card were still tucked in his pocket. The badge read Donggang Number 3 Logistics Park. Job title, Night Warehouse Keeper. Name, Chen Jin. He stared at the words, Night Warehouse Keeper, for several seconds before tucking the card back into his pocket. The card's edge was chipped, its faded blue lanyard digging uncomfortably into his palm. He had always hated the cheap plastic badge during his warehouse shifts, constantly tempted to rip the lanyard off while clocking in for night duty. Now the worn card served as a small anchor, proof he had not been completely severed from his original world. His warehouse training kicked in instinctively, during dehydration, hypothermia, and open wounds. Panicking and recklessly rummaging through unknown areas was the deadliest mistake possible. Messing up a warehouse stocktake only cost the company money. A single wrong move here would cost him his life entirely. He sorted his urgent tasks in clear order: secure the door, check the travel bag under the bench, treat his leg injury, and deal with the monster corpse last of all. He rammed the broken handrail deeper into the door sliding track. The monster's corpse remained wedged in the doorway, partially blocking the icy wind, yet preventing the door from fully closing. Dragging the rotting carcass inside would be revolting. Shoving it back outside meant risking another monster lurking in the blizzard beyond the door. Staring at the creature's frozen claws, a ridiculous thought crossed his frost-addled mind. The sharp talons could be repurposed as makeshift tools. It was not desperation driving the idea, but extreme cold dulling his mind to only one priority: what items could be utilized for survival. He reached down to pry free one of the claws. The first two would not budge an inch. The third shifted slightly, a faint grinding noise emanating from its frozen joint. Chen Jin paused to study the motionless corpse before resuming his effort. Halfway through prying the claw loose, a faint glow lit up the bottom right corner of his vision, resembling a smudged pane of dirty glass superimposed over his sight. Text scrolled slowly across the glowing overlay. Channel 4410, do not open the doors. Whatever you do, keep them sealed. Channel 1187, my door won't fully close. Can anyone tell me how to fix this? Chen Jin's heart sank upon reading the two distress messages. Passenger 1187 was stuck with the exact same faulty door issue. So defective doors were a widespread flaw on this train. The fact that passengers could send messages meant they were still alive and had the spare focus to type alerts. He wanted to tell passenger 1187 to jam rigid objects into the door track, yet no interactive input interface appeared anywhere in his field of view. He attempted to send a message through pure mental concentration, wondering if the channel operated solely via thought transmission. Focusing hard on the glowing text panel, he mentally composed a message. Chen Jin, wedge solid objects into your door sliding track. The message failed to post to the public channel, the chat log continuing to refresh unimpeded. Evidently thought messaging was not a functional feature for him yet. He set the chat channel aside for the time being and returned to dealing with the corpse blocking his door. He had barely pried the first claw free when a soft scraping sound echoed across the icy floor. Paper sliding against frozen metal. Chen Jin snapped his head toward the noise. The severed forearm had loosened its grip, the paper it clutched slipping out to land right beside his shoe. It was not loose paper at all, but an aged train ticket. A faint indentation wrapped around the severed wrist bone, marking where a cord or lanyard had once been fastened before being torn forcibly away. The ticket edges were waterlogged long ago and frozen rigid afterward. No name was printed on the front surface. Only a faint faded serial number stamped across its face. 0000. Chen Jin did not reach down to grab the ticket directly. He scanned the blizzard-choked doorway first, confirming no new monsters lurked in the white haze before using the broken pry bar to drag the ticket within reach and flip it over. Hand-carved marks scored deep into the ticket's reverse side, the paper torn open by the force of the scratching. Do not open the carriage doors. Chen Jin glanced back and forth between the warning inscription and the monster carcass jammed in the doorway. The creature would never have gotten inside if the door had been sealed shut from the start, but the door had been broken and ajar from the very beginning. Was the warning a genuine piece of advice, or a deliberate trap? This derelict train framed every critical instruction like a deceptive scam text. The supposedly lifeless monster twitched abruptly. Chen Jin slammed the broken pry bar against its jaws, holding back from delivering a finishing blow as he fixed his gaze on the scrap of fabric caught between its teeth. A gust of wind fluttered the cloth aside, revealing half a printed character underneath. It matched the font printed on his warehouse staff ID badge. Warehouse. A single character, warehouse, peeked out from the fabric trapped in the monster's teeth. Chen Jin stared at the fragment for a long moment. The fabric was stiff with frost and crusted with dried black blood. cut from the chest panel of a standard work uniform. Only half the character remained visible, and it happened to mark his own line of work. Had this monster been another warehouse keeper in its human life? Chen Jin dismissed the morbid thought instantly. There was no place for misplaced solidarity with a hostile abomination, even if it shared his former occupation. The corpse was nothing more than a hazardous threat requiring neutralization. The carcass twitched a second time from its position wedged in the doorway. It was no violent revival, only a subtle inward jerk of its shoulder. Its claws dragged lightly across the floor with a faint scraping sound. Its jaws hung parted, the trapped fabric fluttering with every gust of wind, as if reminding him not to delay disposing of the body. Chen Jin pressed the broken pry bar against its lower jaw, withholding a final stab for the moment. His last strike had already snapped the pry bar once. Wasting the remaining metal fragment meant facing the reanimated corpse unarmed, left with nothing but his staff ID card to reason with a feral monster. The broken handrail remained lodged in the door track, the corpse plugging the doorway gap entirely. The door could not seal completely regardless of his efforts. Cold wind seeped through the narrow crack between the creature's shoulder and the iron frame, carrying snow flurries inward. The thin layer of ice on the floor thickened steadily, solid white frost streaks spreading outward near the doorway. This was not merely a slightly ajar door. It was an irreparably damaged structural panel. A bitter huff of dry laughter bubbled up in Chen Jin's throat. Other survivors spawned inside intact passenger carriages at the very least. He had been assigned to a run-down frozen storage unit neglected for years, complete with a frozen hostile creature left blocking the entrance. He reached out to run his fingertips along the doorframe. The moment his skin made contact with the cold metal, fresh text materialized in his vision. Aged carriage door seal integrity compromised, sliding track permanently deformed, persistent low temperature seepage. For once, the system had provided genuinely useful information instead of pointless redundant descriptions. Chen Jin traced the warped sliding track downward with his finger, finding a bulging dent in the iron plating. The metal had caved inward from a powerful impact originating inside the carriage long before his arrival. The fresh cracks along the dent were layered over old rust deposits, dark scratch marks etched beneath the corroded surface. He abandoned further inspection of the damaged frame to focus back on the corpse. His available supplies were limited to the broken pry bar, snapped handrail, one severed monster claw, a half-pack of paper tissues, and a frayed torn work glove. The inventory sounded substantial listed out, yet the meager collection resembled discarded defective stock written off during a quarterly warehouse audit. Every single item would have been tossed into the condemned waste bin back at his logistics warehouse. Now these discarded scraps were his primary survival gear. The monster remained trapped in the doorway opening. Drag it inside. Deeply unpleasant, but allows the door to close properly. Push it outside. Cleaner in the short term, with no way to confirm if additional predators wait in the blizzard. Chen Jin chose the unpleasant option. Convenience always came with a steep cost he could not afford to pay right now. He slipped the tattered glove onto his right hand, gripping the creature's front leg through a folded layer of tissue paper with his left hand. The glove was stiff and damp with frozen moisture, torn open at both fingertips, offering negligible practical protection. Only a small psychological buffer against direct contact with the corpse. Move inward. He muttered the command quietly, unsure if he spoke to himself or the motionless carcass. The creature's shoulder was wedged tightly within the door frame. He used the broken handrail to lever the door outward a tiny gap before hauling on the corpse's foreleg. The carcass refused to shift on the first pull, its shoulder bone jammed solid like a frozen block of meat stuck inside a refrigerator drawer. Short gasps tore from his parched throat, lined with gritty dryness. Pulling at an awkward angle would warp the door track permanently, just as misaligned pallet jack movement caused stacked warehouse goods to topple. The risk multiplied exponentially with a potentially active corpse capable of attacking without warning. Chen Jin pressed the handrail downward to pry the door marginally wider, bracing the pry bar against the creature's shoulder, before leaning his full body weight backward. A dull crunch echoed as the shoulder bone shifted free of the door frame. The monster's head jerked upward without warning. Chen Jin cursed under his breath, reacting faster than his conscious thought as he slammed the broken pry bar down to pin its jaws shut. No aggressive lunge followed the spasm. Only accumulated ice shards inside its neck cavity spilled onto the floor with a faint clink. Frozen corpses could still spasm involuntarily. Somehow that grim detail felt strangely consistent with reality. Frozen leftover meat in a freezer occasionally twitched as frost expanded within the tissue. Chen Jin fell silent for 2 seconds, unsettled by his own dark comparison, before resuming the dragging motion. On the second pull, the corpse slid free of the doorway and crashed heavily onto the icy carriage floor. Freed of the blockage, the door swayed outward slightly under the force of the wind. Chun Jin immediately jammed the broken handrail back into the sliding track, propping a cracked loose bench leg against the frame for extra bracing. The door closed most of the way, though a finger-wide gap still remained. Wind and snow continued to drift inward unimpeded. A faint, indistinct shadow flickered through the white blizzard outside the crack and vanished just as quickly. Chun Jin kept his gaze locked on the narrow opening. If a second monster chose to charge the door now, he stood little chance of defending himself successfully. The tremors in his hands had faded slightly, yet never fully disappeared. Straining to drag the heavy corpse had split the scab over his calf wound, blood bonding the saturated tissues firmly to the torn flesh. With every small movement, sending sharp stabs of pain up his leg. Pain was a reassuring sensation. It meant his leg was still functional and responsive to nerve signals. He knelt down to examine the corpse up close. The creature bore even less resemblance to a dog upon closer inspection. Its torso was narrow, skin crisscrossed with frost cracks, protruding ribs visible beneath the taut, frozen hide. Its abdomen sunken inward from prolonged starvation. No eyeballs remained in the empty sockets, packed solid with grayish, white frost deposits. Its mouth split all the way to its earlobes, lined with unnaturally uniform, even teeth. Chun Jin used the sharp, severed claw to pick free the scrap of fabric wedged between its teeth. The material fell to the floor. A fragment of gray-blue work uniform fabric threaded with the same lanyard cord material as his ID badge lanyard. Only one character, Warehouse, could be made out, stuck alongside a blurry half. Character obscured by frozen blood that masked its strokes completely. Warehouses existed at Donggang No. 3 Logistics Park. Cold storage rooms, regular stock rooms, and the work badges of warehouse keepers all bore this character. Chun Jin forced his wandering thoughts to a halt. He tossed the tattered cloth under the seat, resolving not to touch it. As he pulled up the corpse's stat panel, frozen hound remains low, temperature contamination edible flesh, high risk of cold toxin infiltration upon consumption. Heat, retaining fur, high risk of frostbite aggravation upon contact combustible bones, releases toxic fumes when ignited decomposable kill reward, fate points +2. The fate points line flickered bright for a split second before dimming again. Chun Jin read through the listed attributes twice over. The meat was edible yet poisonous. The fur provided warmth yet worsened frostbite. The bones could be burned yet emitted toxic smoke. He weighed his grim options: freezing to death, being poisoned, or suffocating on toxic smoke. None made for a dignified final testament. Poisoning himself looked especially shameful for a warehouse keeper. Recklessly sampling hazardous materials right after reading the warning labels would be an embarrassment to his line of work. This single corpse fulfilled 3 core survival needs: food, insulation, and kindling. Each utility paired with a lethal catch that dared him to try his luck. This shoddy system was masterful at delivering emotional turmoil, almost exclusively negative distress. He held off on decomposing the carcass, not out of moral qualm, or at least, that was the excuse he told himself. His greater fear was far more tangible. Activating decomposition would tear the hound apart into raw meat, bones, and pelts, flooding the carriage with concentrated contamination with no way for him to cleanse himself afterward. The paper towel pressed to his calf wound had frozen stiff against his skin, pulling painfully at torn flesh with every small movement. He licked his cracked, parched lips. The stench of motor oil had faded entirely, leaving only brutal dryness. The decomposable tag was tempting, yet it never specified whether the decomposed materials would be clean and safe. Warehouse work had taught him to distrust such vague markings. Containers labeled recyclable often held leaking batteries beneath their lids, spelling disaster for anyone careless enough to handle them. Chun Jin rearranged all scattered items within the carriage. He set the broken pry bar and hardened claw within easy reach on his right side. The tattered gloves, red hard card, and crushed biscuits were placed on the seat for later inspection. The frozen hound remains were dragged beside the carriage door, and the bloodied scrap of cloth was set next to the frosty pry bar, both marked as off limits for the time being. Once finished organizing, he realized he had instinctively managed the derelict carriage just like one of his warehouses. It was a fitting habit. This broken carriage needed a custodian far more than any standard warehouse ever had. Warehouses never housed hairless abominations lurking outside their entryways. The public chat feed in the bottom right corner of his vision scrolled relentlessly. Chun Jin had intended to ignore it. constant exposure to panic chatter clouded judgment, especially when most survivors posted incoherent ramblings born of terror. Several rapid-fire messages caught his eye regardless. User 2033. Seal the doors shut. Safety is guaranteed once they're fully closed. I heard something outside moments ago, and it vanished the instant I locked my door. User 6681. Is that truthful? Cold wind is seeping through the gaps around my door. User 2033. 100% true. Never open your door for any reason. Whoever does will die instantly. User 1187. My door isn't sealed tight enough. User 1187's message cut off abruptly at the M-, quickly buried beneath a flood of newer chat logs. User 4410. Respond to us. What happened with your door? User 2033. There you have proof. I warned everyone not to tamper with their doors. Chen Jin stared at User 2033's bold claim that closed doors equaled safety, then glanced at his own door, which barely functioned as a physical barrier at all. The first false rule had surfaced. Safety was never granted by simply closing a door. It was only possible if the door could form a complete, airtight seal. He had always despised this brand of empty folk wisdom. The advice sounded solid on the surface, yet relied on unstated critical prerequisites. Warehouse operations ran into the exact same issue. Colleagues would claim stacked goods could reach 3 layers tall, omitting the mandatory steel pallet base required for structural stability. He pressed the paper towel firmly against the edges of his wound, daring not to peel it away. A sharp jolt of pain shot upward through his leg, sharpening his foggy mind in the process. Words that sounded meaningless often carried the most vital truth during crises. Most survivors blindly trusted public announcements, chat room advice, and second-hand survival tips. Yet every carriage spawned with unique starting conditions. A single piece of guidance could save a life in one compartment and seal someone's fate in another. Chen Jin chose not to correct the false information in the chat. He could not send messages at present, nor did he owe strangers a crash course on hazard mitigation. Hosting a free safety lecture on the first day of the apocalypse felt like inviting misfortune. He refocused his attention on the leaking carriage door. If the gaps remained unsealed, the bitter cold would overwhelm him. Long before any monster could strike, no adhesive tape, screwdrivers, or wooden planks were available. He could dismantle the seats, but the process would waste precious time even if he disregarded the loss of a place to rest. The frozen hound's fur could block the frigid wind, yet the clear warning of worsening frostbite ruled it out entirely. His gaze drifted to a red scarf hanging from the edge of the overhead luggage rack, frozen rigid by the cold and faded in hue. The scarf remained structurally intact. It stood 3 steps away from the door, positioned directly above the thickest patch of accumulated ice on the floor. Gripping the seat for support, he pushed himself upright, each movement sending a throbbing pang through his injured calf. The 3 short steps felt like trekking to the corporate finance office to file reimbursement claims. With every stride, he checked the stability of the ground beneath his feet, the integrity of the metal handrails, and the risk of a grotesque face suddenly pressing in through the door cracks. Upon reaching the luggage rack, he did not grab the scarf directly. Instead, he prodded it gently with the pry bar. No system prompt appeared. He tapped the luggage rack itself next. Loose luggage rack, insufficient load, bearing capacity, detachable. Chen Jin tilted his head upward to inspect the fractured welds holding the rack in place. The silver lining, it could be disassembled. The grim downside, the rack might collapse under its own weight at any second. He pried the metal frame downward with the pry bar, drawing a strained, creaking groan from the rusted metal. He froze immediately, waiting 2 full seconds for a collapse that never came. He pried once more, and a sharp click echoed as a rusted screw clattered onto the icy floor. He bent to pick up the screw and slipped it into his pocket, a reflex so ingrained it made him huff a bitter laugh. His former warehouse manager had called him overly frugal, a complaint he had once contested fiercely. Now he acknowledged the supervisor had been entirely correct. He peeled the frozen scarf free bit by bit. A layer of frost flaked off the stiff fabric as he pulled it loose. He shook the scarf to dislodge tiny ice crystals. No parasitic organisms or obvious bloodstains marked its surface. Worn red scarf, faint musty odor, temporary wind barrier, no contamination warnings were attached to the item. These simple system tags felt far warmer than the hollow "Welcome aboard the Doomsday Train" greeting, emblazoned on the carriage walls. Chen Jin threaded the scarf into the lowest gaps along the doorframe to plug the draft. Cold wind whipped the scarf's loose edges outward instantly. So he weighed the fabric down with a broken handrail and wedged the newly collected rusted screw into the sliding track crevice for extra anchoring. His first attempt failed completely. A strong gust tore the scarf loose, flinging the damp fabric straight into his face. Chen Jin squeezed his eyes shut and drew a deep breath. Now he battled freezing temperatures alongside a humiliating slap from a moldy scarf. He retrieved the scarf and repositioned it, looping one end around his seat leg before stuffing the bulk into the door cracks. The harder the wind pushed inward, the tighter the fabric sealed against the openings. The drafts lessened drastically. Cold air still seeped through tiny fissures, but the harsh blizzard pouring into the carriage had been reduced to the faint chill of a poorly insulated rental apartment. The improvement was tangible. Stinging snow particles no longer lashed relentlessly against his exposed cheeks. He leaned against the seat to catch his breath. He allowed himself no sense of relief. The door leaks were sealed, yet the carriage stayed bitterly cold, and the ice coating the floor would not melt out of sympathy for his efforts. Only a few hours remained until the first scheduled station stop, forcing him to prioritize 3 urgent issues: drinkable water, viable fuel supplies, his infected calf wound, and overall carriage thermal insulation. Another unsettling detail snagged his focus as he studied the inner surface of the door. Deep, crisscrossing scratches beneath the lock mechanism. Several gashes cut clean through the painted coating to expose blackened, corroded metal beneath. The marks sat far too low to have been clawed open by the frozen hounds from outside. They looked as though someone had knelt inside the carriage, scraping frantically outward at the metal plating with bare fingernails. He stretched a finger to brush the scratches, and system text materialized before his eyes. Ancient escape attempt marks left by the previous carriage occupant attempt unfinished. The phrase, previous occupant, made his hand freeze against the cold metal wall. He hated the implication of the wording. It framed the carriage as reusable equipment, with human lives treated as disposable consumables swapped out once broken beyond use. Had someone else occupied this carriage before him? This was no beginner tutorial zone, nor a randomized disposable chamber generated individually for every passenger. This decrepit carriage had a prior owner, possibly dozens more. That trapped passenger had scraped desperately at the door hard enough to carve permanent gouges into steel, yet failed to escape the confinement. His gaze drifted to the old ticket marked with the serial number 0000 resting at his feet. Do not open the carriage door. A chilling realization struck him. This warning might not have been meant to keep exterior threats out, but to warn trapped passengers against attempting to flee outward from within the carriage. A sudden wave of biting cold washed over his skin. He pulled his hand away from the scratched metal and pressed his palm flat against the carriage wall beside the door. If doors displayed attribute panels, the carriage structure itself should as well, a straightforward logical deduction. He had overlooked this simple observation earlier only because hypothermia had dulled his capacity for environmental assessment and resource inventory. Faint lines of text faded into view, hazed over as if seen through a layer of mist. Obsolete green train carriage damaged, thermal insulation layer seal failure on right carriage door, empty fuel compartment, single refresh, available current remaining fate points. 2. 2 additional lines appeared beneath the core attributes. Temporary sealing. Consumes 1 fate point to repair 1 draft source. Effect lasts 72 hours constant. Temperature interlayer. Consumes 3 fate points to grant the carriage basic thermal regulation, with increased ongoing fuel consumption. Chen Jin stared at the second option motionlessly for a long moment. In this freezing metal box, the word constant temperature sounded identical to a fraudulent sales pitch. He possessed only 2 fate points, falling 1 point short of the requirement for thermal stabilization. He glanced down at the frozen hound carcass on the floor, then back toward the blinding snowstorm raging outside the sealed door. The system had not handed him a direct solution to his predicament. Instead, it hung the answer just out of his reach, clearly labeling the exact cost required to obtain it. Chen Jin lifted his palm off the wall and rasped quietly into the frigid air. Fine. Just 1 more point short. Is that it? A faint scraping noise echoed from the gap covered by the red scarf on the outer side of the door. Scrape. Something was sniffing at the fabric barrier. The scarf bulged outward under external pressure, and a damp pale sliver squeezed through the crack. First a nose, then a hairless ash-gray snout poked into the carriage space. Chen Jin did not retreat an inch. Instead, he jammed the broken pry bar horizontally across the door track. The creature sniffed cautiously from the outside, its teeth grating against the steel surface with an ear-splitting screech. Unlike the previous frozen hound that had charged recklessly, this specimen moved slowly and methodically, inching inward bit by bit as if waiting for the human inside to remove the scarf blockade voluntarily. Only its head could fit through the narrow gap, yet even that posed a lethal threat. Chun-Jin planted his left foot against the seat leg, bracing the door, bearing down firmly on the pry bar with his right hand. His peripheral vision locked onto the hardened claw lying on the floor. He had no other functional weapon at hand. If the door track sustained damage from this assault, the scarf and screw barrier would become completely useless. The ash-gray nose twitched again, drawn to the faint scent of blood seeping from his calf injury. The paper towel wrapped around his leg had long since soaked through, his trousers clinging tight to the open wound. Every gust of cold air penetrating the fabric sent a sharp tightening sensation up his lower leg. He glanced once more at the red scarf, then abruptly pulled half the fabric free from the door gap. The exterior entity surged forward instantly to exploit the opening, shoving its head deeper into the carriage. Its mouth split open all the way to its jawline, thick black saliva dripping onto the metal track and melting into small pools of grimy water upon contact with frost. Before the creature could advance further, Chun-Jin slammed the broken handrail downward to clamp the door shut tight, pinning the gray head firmly between the door frame and track. The monster thrashed violently, its claws scrabbling frantically against the outer door, plating in a shrill flurry of sounds. Chun-Jin did not engage in a brute force struggle. He guided the hardened claw toward the torn flesh along the creature's lower jaw and thrust it inward. His first strike glanced off its teeth, the impact sending a numbing vibration up his forearm. The second jab buried the claw tip deep into soft tissue. The creature snapped its head backward violently, a spatter of pale gray blood spraying across the door gap before it retreated fully into the snow outside, dragging the embedded claw with it. Chun-Jin made no move to pursue or pry the door open to inspect the damage. He stuffed the red scarf back into the gaps, resecuring the handrail and rusted screw in their original positions. He remained stationary against the seat until only the howl of wind lingered outside, then slid weakly down onto the cold floor. No fate point reward popped up in his vision, and he had no intention of opening the door to confirm the creature's state. It was most likely merely wounded, and even if it had perished, he would not gain kill credit for the fatal blow. He wiped the gray blood off the remaining portion of the claw, his fingers trembling badly enough that he released his grip rather than straining his exhausted muscles further. Every movement during the altercation had relied on raw shoulder and leg strength. Once the adrenaline faded, his wound and frost, numbed fingers flared with agonizing backlash. Thin, wispy vapor curled upward from the black saliva residue on the door track, and a patch of the scarf fabric had turned damp and corroded from the toxic fluid. Using the tattered glove as a buffer against contamination, he folded the stained fabric inward and drove the rusted screw deeper into the track gap for reinforcement. He could not guarantee how long the door barricade would hold, yet any future intruder would now be forced to tear through multiple layered obstacles to break inside. He reapplied fresh paper towels to his calf wound and waited for the acute pain to dull before reopening the public chat feed. User 0719. Frozen hound flesh available for trade. Cut fresh on demand. 2 bites of meat for 1 biscuit. Provides warmth and sustenance. Act fast if you want to survive. A close-up photograph was attached immediately after the message. Thin slices of dark crimson meat sat beside a hound claw caked with dark ash residue, filling its grooves. User 2033. I've sampled the meat sold by 0719, no adverse effects at all. Keep your doors sealed safely. Anyone lacking fuel may rely on this flesh for temporary survival. User 6681. Do not consume the meat. It carries low temperature contamination. Multiple survivors in my vicinity have begun losing their teeth after ingestion. User 0719. Stop spreading baseless slander if you cannot offer trade goods of your own. Chun-Jin stared at the attached photograph, a gnawing hunger twisting painfully in his stomach. The system panel had confirmed the hound flesh was technically edible, yet the critical caveat of cold toxin poisoning remained unignorable. He had no way of knowing if gradual tooth loss counted as being alive after consuming the contaminated meat. He patted the crumpled packet of biscuits tucked in his pocket. Though crushed to powder, the dried biscuits posed no hidden physical harm to his body. He refrained from participating in the heated argument and dragged the frozen hound corpse further underneath his seat. User 0719's willingness to barter tainted flesh for basic rations proved that a portion of survivors were already desperate enough to disregard safety risks. User 2033's endorsement of the trade suggested either blind gullibility or a selfish hope that other survivors would act as unwitting test subjects for the meat's toxicity. Either scenario warranted maximum distance from both parties. A small trade notification popped up in the corner of his vision, nearly lost amid hundreds of survival pleas and resource sale posts flooding the chat window. User 6681, purchasing red hard cards. One card exchanged for a small quantity of fuel dust. Single transaction only. Chun Jin hovered his finger over the trade confirmation button while retrieving his own red hard card from his pocket. The card bore no printed markings on its front face, coated in a thin, oily film as though it had rested inside a travel bag for years. Aside from its rigid physical texture, its function remained unknown. He could not fathom why user 6681 sought this specific item, yet fuel dust could be converted into fate points, exactly what he needed to activate the carriage thermal interlayer. He withheld confirming the trade and sent a direct message instead. Chun Jin, how long will this fuel dust burn for? User 6681 replied after a short pause. User 6681, only several minutes of combustion. It is burnable material and redeemable for 1 fate point. This trade offer expires once the card is exchanged. The response was refreshingly candid, free of empty promises of guaranteed survival or exaggerated profit claims. Chun Jin squeezed the card between his stiffened fingers. Retaining the card might unlock unknown future benefits, yet acquiring the fuel dust granted him a concrete method to obtain the final missing fate point right now. Retention was only a vague possibility, while the dust represented his only tangible path forward in the immediate crisis. He tapped the confirm button to complete the trade. The red card faded gradually from his palm, as if siphoned away through an invisible screen barrier. A crumpled paper packet holding fine black, gray powder materialized on his seat the next instant, so lightweight it could disperse entirely with a single breath of wind. Obtained. Low-grade fuel dust combustible property, extremely short burn duration, exchange value for fate points. Chun Jin stowed the wrapped powder deep within his travel bag, weighing the packet down with his crushed biscuit packet. The dust was far too volatile to risk exposure to gusts if he opened the carriage door, which would render his red card trade completely pointless. After securing the bag opening, he pulled his hand back. He faced a forced trade, off between his last usable combustible material and his missing fate point. Neither option was ideal. Yet when pushed to the brink of starvation and hypothermia, practical survival overshadowed any calculation of fair trade value. Staying alive through the current crisis was his sole priority. He had intended to message user 6681 regarding the carriage fuel compartment when an unsolicited private message forced its way into his view. User 0792. Do not open your door under any circumstance. Chun Jin frowned at the warning. A photograph followed the text immediately afterward. Heavy snow fog blurred the frame, and the image shook violently from unsteady hands. It captured a partially ajar carriage door with a middle-aged man standing outside amid falling snow, thick frost coating the shoulders of his cotton-padded jacket. He clutched an old paper ticket in his grip. The ticket details were blurred by the camera lens, but its serial number stood crystal clear. 0000. A second line of text appeared beneath the photograph. User 0792. He keeps calling for me to unlock the door. He claims he is my father. Chun Jin crumpled the fuel dust packet tightly in his grip as he fixated on the numbered ticket in the photo. He recalled the identical numbered ticket inside his own pocket, along with the escape scratches carved into his carriage door interior. He could not verify if the man in the photograph was truly the sender's father, yet the 0000 serial number was undeniably recurring, not a random anomaly. He paused before typing a reply. A blunt warning to distrust the figure would ring hollow. If a person heard the familiar voice of their parent calling from outside the door, no stern text message would overpower the emotional pull of that voice. Chun Jin, move as far away from the door as possible and do not respond to his calls. Find heavy objects to wedge the door track shut securely. User 0792 sent no immediate reply, and Chun Jin did not send a follow-up message. He could only provide barrier reinforcement advice from a distance, unable to physically steady the panicked survivor's hands through the digital interface. He pulled his own 0000 ticket out, gripping its edge through his torn glove. His ticket bore the same serial number on the front and the deeply etched warning, "Do not open the carriage door," carved into its reverse side. Two matching tickets had ended up with two separate survivors trapped inside poorly sealed carriages, far too deliberate to be coincidence. Still, he chose not to relay this speculative observation to user 0792. The stranger was already under severe duress, facing a figure impersonating their parent, and additional unsettling theories would only worsen their panic. Back in the public chat, user 2033 continued pressuring survivors to purchase the tainted hound meat. with user 0719 slashing trade prices to discourage rational thought among desperate users. Chun Jin minimized the chat window and lifted his gaze back toward his sealed door. The red scarf sat quietly wedged into the cracks with no further sounds from the exterior when the carriage's public broadcast system flickered back to life. Time remaining until first station stop. 6 hours current fuel reserves, critically depleted. Chun Jin looked down at the tiny packet of fuel dust cupped in his palm. Burning the dust right now would grant him the third fate point he needed for thermal stabilization. Hoarding the powder would only supply a few fleeting minutes of warmth from open flame. Both options were insufficient to resolve his overall predicament. He could only endure the immediate threats first before mapping out subsequent survival plans. Staring at the numbered ticket in the stranger's photograph, his first instinct was to flip over his own old ticket on the floor for another close inspection. This reflex alone spelled danger. When teetering on the edge of hypothermia, all supernatural horrors and world-altering truths took second place to securing clean water and heat sources. Even so, the repeated 0000 marking pricked at his consciousness like an unremovable splinter. He used the hardened claw to drag his own ticket closer without direct physical contact. Frost had bleached the paper surface pale white, its edges curled and frayed, yet the front serial number remained legible. 0000 user 0792's photograph featured a ticket bearing this exact same code. If only one such ticket existed, where had the impersonating father figure obtained his copy? If countless copies circulated throughout the train, then 0000 was not a passenger ticket at all, but a universal passkey, a lure, or a generic identifier assigned to all deceased passengers by this uncaring train system. Apparently, the system even processed fatalities in bulk batches. Chun Jin suppressed the urge to type this bitter observation into a message. He opened the direct message box for user 0792, typed 2 words, then erased them. Chun Jin, keep the door sealed. He had already delivered this instruction once, and restating it carried minimal practical value. When fear overwhelmed a person's judgment, 10 typed warnings would never outweigh a parent's voice calling out from the blizzard outside. Chun Jin nudged the phone, like vision frame aside, yet it did nothing. Private messages lingered at the edge of his sight, and the photograph remained fixed in view. A fingerprint smudge on the inner glass stung his eyes most sharply. Sender 0792's hands shook while taking the photo, but the person had still brushed away the frost to peer outside the door. The fact that 0792 could clear the ice to look outside, even amid trembling, meant they were far from senseless. This only worsened Chun Jin's predicament. Even the clearest-minded person might yield to the voice of a family member and unlock the door. 2 soft knocks echoed against the iron wall beside the carriage window. Tap, tap. The sound was too gentle to be someone ramming the door or frozen corpse hound scraping the metal plating. It sounded like a person rapping their knuckles against hollow sheet metal from the adjacent compartment. Chun Jin stayed seated, pressing his tongue against the split cut at the corner of his mouth. The dull pain kept him from acting rashly. He tightened his grip on his hardened claw weapon. First, he checked the door. The red scarf was still wedged tight in the crack. Next, the corpse. The frozen hound carcass had not shifted an inch. Lastly, the wall, its metal surface marked only with aged rust and frost stains, offering no clue as to whose kin hid behind it. Quit this. The words left his mouth carrying no real conviction. If this train heeded please, it would have handed him a bottle of water in the first chapter instead of a hound with empty eye sockets. Another message popped up within his field of vision from 0792. 0792. He's still outside the door. 0792. He said my mother will keep knocking on the wall if I refuse to open up. 0792. Brother, what am I supposed to do? The honorific brother hung heavy in his view. Chun Jin's Adam's apple bobbed, yet not a drop of moisture passed down his parched throat. Casual laborers at the logistics park before the end of the world used to call him Brother Chun, their words invariably followed by a request to haul a heavy crate. Now this same address preceded a desperate question of whether to let one's own father inside. His fingers hovered over the input panel twice before he slowly typed out a single reply. Chun Jin, step away from the door. Don't press up against the wall. 0792. The carriage is barely big enough to stand in. The statement rang true. Chun Jin glanced around his dilapidated carriage compartment, fitted with face-to-face green train seats and a pitifully narrow central aisle. The frozen hound's body jammed the doorway, cluttered alongside a broken pry bar, his hardened claw, the red scarf, old train tickets, and grimy tissue paper. This space was no safe haven. It resembled an iron crate stuffed full of misfortune and shaken violently to mix everything together. Chen Jin abandoned further attempts to persuade 0792. Comforting others demanded strength he did not possess. He could not even fully secure his own carriage door. Static screeched suddenly from the overhead speakers, electric currents scraping through every corner of the carriage like sandpaper dragged across eardrums. Time until first scheduled stop, 5 hours and 59 minutes. Passengers are advised to secure adequate fuel reserves. Low temperature protection system inactive. Chen Jin tilted his head upward. You're awfully punctual with your warnings. It notified passengers of impending doom far more reliably than any delivery service notified customers of parcel arrivals. He fished a tiny pouch of low-grade fuel dust out from the innermost pocket of his coat. The edges of the wrapping tissue had grown damp. The gray-black powder clumped into a minuscule pile barely worth mentioning. The system item description hovered persistently in his sight. Low-grade fuel dust, flammable, extremely brief combustion duration, exchange value, 1 fate point. Chen Jin stared at the word flammable for a long moment without moving a muscle. Trading the dust for fate points would bring his total up to 3, enough to activate the thermal insulation lining. Unfortunately, the lining could not generate heat out of thin air. The fuel storage compartment sat completely empty, and superior thermal retention meant nothing without a heat source to maintain warmth. If he held onto the dust to burn for warmth, how much heat could such a tiny quantity possibly produce? He laid the tissue flat beside his seat, lifted a pinch of fuel dust with the tip of his claw, and brought a lighter close. The instant the flame made contact, the powder flared bright with a pale blue-white tongue of fire, fleeting as a single blink in the surrounding darkness. The flame died out in less than 3 seconds. A small charred patch marred the tissue, releasing harsh, acrid fumes. Chen Jin squeezed his eyes shut, suppressing the urge to curse. Swallowing words only wasted precious bodily fluids. Burning every speck of this dust would yield warmth for a handful of minutes at most, making exchanging it for fate points the more logical choice. Even so, activating the thermal lining would raise overall fuel consumption. And with no extra fuel to replenish supplies, he would only be refurbishing his own coffin for marginally greater comfort in his final moments. He began tallying every combustible object left inside the carriage. The red scarf was indispensable for sealing cold drafts through the door gap and could not be burned. Seat sponge would burn readily, yet generate thick choking smoke, and burning the cushioning would remove a critical layer of cold insulation. Broken handrails were solid metal and useless for fire. Travel sacks, tattered gloves, leftover tissues, and biscuit wrappers combined would not even sustain a modest campfire. His gaze drifted toward the rear of the window, side seats. A thin storage panel was fitted beneath the benches, its edge warped upward, originally meant solely for stowing small debris with no load-bearing capacity. Chen Jin tapped the surface with his claw. The hollow echo confirmed empty space behind it. Aged storage partition board detachable, provides mild thermal insulation, flammable. Finally, a burnable item that was not essential to his survival. Chen Jin wedged his claw into the crevice, but paused before prying it loose. He first reached his hand behind the panel, finding no blue contamination cracks nor frost tainted with toxic corruption. Only a thin layer of ordinary dust coating the surface. Chen Jin breathed out quietly. Ordinary dust felt oddly reassuring in this hellish landscape. He pressed down hard with the claw, splitting the board's edge with a sharp crack. He froze to listen. Silence hung outside the door, and the faint knocking from the wall had ceased entirely. Unbroken quiet was never a good omen in this place. He resumed prying and tore off a chunk of the wooden board. Tiny splinters pierced the fabric of his torn glove, stabbing sharply into his palm. He stacked the broken timber pieces near the door, well away from the red scarf, and dragged a fragment over using a bone from the frozen hound's corpse. The system tag for the hound's skeleton floated before his eyes once more. Bones are combustible. Combustion releases toxic fumes. Burning the bones was equivalent to purchasing a faulty product with hidden fine print absolving the manufacturer of all liability for harm. He kicked the bones back beside the hound's remains and lit only the wooden partition pieces. The fire caught sluggishly, the cold, damp timber releasing thick white smoke before blooming into a yellow flame. A faint wisp of warmth filled the carriage, negligible yet enough to ease the numb stiffness in his fingertips. He held his hands near the fire for 2 seconds before snatching them back abruptly. Chen Jin dared not linger too close to the heat. Larger flames would flood the compartment with smoke, while a tiny flame offered no real benefit. Opening the door to ventilate the smoke was impossible. The windows were frozen solid shut. and forcing them open would carve new entry points for the horrors lurking outside. It was at this moment that the public communication channel flooded with an avalanche of new messages. User 2033, coordinates for free fuel. Everyone pay attention here. User 2033, pry open the third floorboard beneath the seats on the door side. Hidden fuel storage compartments are concealed there. User 6681, I pried open the window side panel just now instead of the door side one. User 2033, layout differs between individual carriages. Stop spreading misleading information. User 0719, I found fuel on my end. User 2033 is telling the truth. Chen Jin's lips tugged faintly upon seeing 0719 validate the claim. Statements backed by these two users carried roughly the same credibility as meat harvested from the frozen corpse hounds. Technically viable for use, yet certain to inflict severe harm upon the consumer. Panic began spreading across the channel instantly. User 4410, white frost covers the panels on my door side. User 9022, my younger brother is shaking uncontrollably. I'm going to take the chance and check. 0792, there are noises coming from my doorway as well. Chen Jin's fingertip hovered over the holographic text upon reading 0792's message. Attempting to pry panels adjacent to the door in that moment was no different from leaving one's front door unlocked for unknown intruders to walk in unopposed. He withheld an immediate reply and re-examined user 2033's messages. Words such as free, for all passengers, hidden fuel compartment strung together like scam messages skinned for the apocalypse. Anyone possessing legitimate fuel hoards would never broadcast their location publicly. Fuel was life itself, not a discount coupon to be handed out freely. He pulled up his private message history with user 6681 to double. Check the description for the spare fuel slot, the third metal floorboard under the window seats. Fastened with black screws, producing a dull hollow knock when tapped and marked with blue contamination fissures. User 2033 directed everyone toward the door side panels. What exactly existed beside the carriage doors? Chen Jin glanced toward his own entrance. The red scarf plugged the door gaps. A fractured handrail jammed the sliding track. The hound's carcass blocked the bottom frame, and a blinding pale white blizzard raged beyond the metal sheet. Door side areas contained nothing but draft-prone cracks, not fuel reserves. He typed a warning into the public channel. Chen Jin, do not pry open door side panels. Those areas sit alongside the door sliding mechanisms, not fuel storage chambers. His message had barely sent when user 2033 fired back an immediate retort. User 2033, it's you again? You begrudge others access to vital supplies and now forbid anyone from searching for fuel? User 0719, he wants to monopolize all survival intelligence for himself. User 4410, Chen Jin, are you absolutely certain about this? The word certain glowed on the screen as Chen Jin watched the wooden fire crackle steadily. Heat washed over the back of his hands from the burning partition board. He held no absolute certainty. He had merely fallen victim to the dangers of door cracks once before and learned far earlier than the other passengers that the system always withheld critical details in its notifications. Survival in this ruined world required no grand secret. It only demanded watching others step into lethal traps and avoiding those same pitfalls oneself. Chen Jin, I am not certain. The channel fell silent for a beat before he continued typing. Chen Jin, but user 6681 successfully accessed fuel via window, side panels secured with black screws, while user 2033 points to door, side areas covered in toxic frost. Make your own judgment calls, and listen closely for external noises before prying any panels open. This honest uncertainty stung far more harshly than a definitive guarantee ever could. Absolute certainty relieved people of the burden of personal caution, while uncertainty forced every individual to bear responsibility for their own choices. Verbal abuse flooded the channel shortly afterward, led viciously by user 2033 with user 0719 echoing every insult. The pair operated like crooked merchants peddling contaminated flesh alongside reckless door opening tutorials. Chen Jin ignored the harassment and pried off another chunk of the partition board to feed into the flames. Thick smoke billowed outward, triggering a harsh coughing fit that scraped his throat raw as if abraded with sandpaper. He grabbed a dry tissue and waved it slowly toward the fractured window gap to funnel smoke toward the minor crack leaking frigid outside air. That same draft which tormented him endlessly earlier had now become a small blessing. Every flaw brought by misfortune could be repurposed for survival once despair reached its lowest point. A system notification materialized at the periphery of his vision. Temporary combustion source connected. Estimated low temperature protection. Runtime remaining 41 minutes. 41 minutes of partial warmth was nothing to celebrate for Qinjin. The train would not make its first stop for another 5 hours and 56 minutes, barely a fraction of the total waiting period. Even so, without those 41 minutes of mild heat, he might lack the physical stamina to process his next decision entirely. His gaze drifted back to the tiny pile of low-grade fuel dust resting on the tissue, leaving him with only one final choice. Exchange it for fate points, or preserve it for emergency fire use. Flame light glinted across the smoke-yellowed tissue paper. Qinjin suddenly recalled the bottle filled with ice chips tainted with motor oil from the first chapter, and how he had nearly swallowed that filthy liquid in desperation. No drinking water, no sustainable fuel, and his fate points sat 1 unit short of activation requirements. This train was no ordinary survival game. Games at minimum provided beginner survival kits. This train offered nothing but impossible multiple-choice questions, each missing half the viable answers needed to survive. A shrill scream suddenly blazed across the public channel. User 9022. The door just flew open. User 9022. I didn't unlock it. Something behind the panel dragged the door inward. User 9022. My brother woke up. He's laughing, grinning madly, even with all his teeth rotted away. The moment the scream finished uploading, Qinjin froze mid-motion with the tissue held beside the fire. Immediately afterward, the howling wind outside the carriage shifted tone. The disturbance did not stem from his own door, but echoed from compartments far down the train line. A dull metallic dragging sound drifted through the snow fog and along the railroad tracks, like an entire carriage being torn free from the rails and hauled away by an unseen force. The overhead speakers remained silent, and the public channel flickered with momentary static before a gray system alert appeared for all users to see. User 9022 has been derailed from the train system. Qinjin stared rigidly at the text as the fire singed the edge of the tissue in his grip. He did not move until the flame nipped his fingertip, forcing him to jerk his hand backward from the burn pane. A gust split the white mist covering the carriage window wide open. In the distant darkness, a single carriage hung crookedly suspended off the railroad tracks. It had not plummeted fully nor vanished entirely, dangling halfway buried beneath heavy snow with every window dark and lifeless, resembling rows of permanently half-shuttered eyes. Qinjin smothered the fire to a faint glow and slowly edged closer to the window pane. Something stirred against the final window of that derailed carriage. It was no human figure, merely a hand, or an appendage mimicking the shape of a hand, scraping upward repeatedly against the frosted glass. Frost crumbled away beneath the dragging limb to reveal 2 crudely scratched characters etched into the ice. Beneath the cleared frost, the words "Do not trust" were carved into the window's surface. Qinjin fixated on the message, the stabbing dry ache in his throat momentarily dulled. Was the warning directed toward users 2033 and 0719, the automated train announcements, or the entire cursed train itself? The campfire popped sharply as the wooden partition burned clean through in the center. Qinjin glanced back to the gray-black fuel dust still resting atop the tissue, so lightweight it threatened to disperse into thin air with the slightest breeze. He clenched the tissue tight within his palm as flame curled along the paper edges. The derailed carriage stood crooked and abandoned out in the snowfield, waiting silently for more passengers to stumble into fatal mistakes. Qinjin closed his eyes and uttered a single word. Exchange. The pile of gray-black fuel dust condensed into a tiny speck before dissolving completely. The fate point counter in his vision climbed from 2 to 3, and the carriage system panel lit up instantly. He paid no mind to the temporary sealed barrier function. Door gaps continued leaking cold air regardless of minor repairs. Patching one flaw only prolonged his slow freeze. His priority was to pull his carriage out of this icy tomb first. Temporary thermal insulation lining activated. Maintains baseline survivable temperature when the carriage is fully sealed. Increases overall fuel consumption. Heat continuously escapes through damaged doors and windows. The compartment did not instantly warm to the comfort of a safe home. The fire still burned low. Cold air seeped through every crack, and a sharp throbbing spread through his fingers as frozen blood gradually circulated back into his extremities. Once the 41 minutes of fire warmth expired, Qinjin spent the remaining hours pressing the red scarf. Broken handrail and wooden seat supports against every draft point. Sustaining himself on a few stale dry biscuits and the persistent physical pain in his legs to endure the weight. The train slowed gradually, the rumble of the railroad tracks stretching long and drawn out. Static crackled once more from the overhead speakers. Approaching designated station stop, Chen Jin grabbed his broken pry bar and hardened claw weapon, pushed open the carriage door, and stepped down into the snow blanketing the station platform. The phrase "Do not respond" was carved into the bottom edge of the station sign. Its strokes uneven and rushed as though the carver had fled for their life mid-creation, leaving the final horizontal stroke unfinished. Chen Jin stood motionless in the snow to study the marking and snapped a photograph. The broadcast claimed the deceased entities would not attack unprovoked. Yet the station sign issued an urgent warning against any form of response. Paired together, the two notices resembled receiving an umbrella printed with a warning along the handle stating the item offered no actual protection from the rain. He resisted rushing straight into the town streets, first glancing back at his carriage. The red scarf remained jammed within the door gaps, the temporary thermal lining rapidly depleting its energy, and condensation fog across the windows slowly faded away. The 6-hour stop was neither brief nor lengthy. He needed to locate drinking water and a means to access the official train fuel compartments, ideally returning before his carriage plunged back into freezing temperatures. The small town beyond the platform lay bleached pale by the brutal cold. Low buildings lined the dirt roadways with half-rotted window coverings. Frigid gusts carrying a nauseating blend of aged coal dust and decaying flesh outward from each broken window. An overturned tricycle sat abandoned at the roadside, its cargo hold filled with cabbage frozen solid into pale bluish, white blocks. A small convenience store stood nearby with its rolling metal shutter propped half open, surrounded by a chaotic jumble of footprints, as if someone had scattered a pouch of nails across the snow surface. Chen Jin steered clear of the convenience store. He had witnessed two people duck into the shutter entrance moments prior. Yet only one figure emerged before being dragged back inside by an unseen hand reaching through the dark doorway. Dense footprints did not equate to a safe destination in this wasteland. He crept along the building foundations to bypass the clustered area and turned down a side alley. A wooden sign hung above the door of the first building, its faded red paint barely legible. Shoe repairs, key cutting. Edible supplies were unlikely here, but blades, cord, adhesive, and empty containers might still remain intact. Vessels capable of holding clean water were more valuable than any food in this frozen wasteland. Chen Jin refrained from kicking the door open immediately. He tossed a rusted screw through the narrow door crack. The metal object clattered and rolled across the floor without drawing any sound or movement from within the space. After pressing his ear to the door for a prolonged silence check, he slipped sideways into the shop interior. The repair shop offered negligible warmth compared to the outdoors. Frost-coated rows of shoe lasts lined the countertop, their frosted gray rounded tops resembling faceless heads staring toward the entryway. A tipped-over toolbox lay against the wall, containing a small hammer, 2 rusted blades, a roll of nylon cord, and a half-empty bottle of adhesive. Chen Jin stuffed all usable supplies into his pack, and his fingertips brushed against an enamel mug tucked furthest back on the counter surface. A solid block of frozen tea filled the mug bottom, dried tea leaves trapped beneath the ice layer. He lifted the mug to his nose, catching first a metallic rust odor followed by the bitter stale scent of aged tea. No motor oil or rotting flesh tainted the contents. He did not gulp down the ice recklessly. Instead, he scraped a thin shard of frozen tea with his blade and let it melt slowly on his tongue. The melted liquid carried a sharp, bitter chill that ached deep into his tooth roots, but it bore none of the toxic foulness that brought instant sickness. The water was safe to consume. This small victory loosened the tension coiled tight across Chen Jin's shoulders. He placed the enamel mug securely at the bottom of his backpack and refrained from melting more ice for immediate drinking, resealing the leftover frozen tea intact. He had only just arrived at the station with unhealed leg wounds, and the thermal lining steadily drained his limited energy reserves. Celebrating this small water find with excessive consumption would only deplete his physical stamina prematurely. A soft cough echoed from the adjacent wall without warning. Xiao Jin. The small hammer slipped from Chen Jin's grasp and clanged loudly against the wooden countertop. He made no move to retrieve it, his fingers pressing hard against a frayed section of the nylon cord until the thin material bit into his palm to leave a pale indentation. The voice from the opposite wall carried a gentle tone, its soft lilt identical to how his late mother used to call him from the kitchen doorway to wake him for breakfast. Chen Jin clearly recalled rushing to the hospital upon her passing, clutching a food container filled with cold shredded potatoes that he could not snap fully shut in his grief. He had scrubbed the container countless times afterward, yet faint traces of cooking oil lingered along the edges until he finally moved residences years later. It's freezing outside. Come inside. I saved you a warm meal. Chun Jin's gaze locked onto a narrow door set into the base of the shared wall. Fresh snow piled along the bottom door frame, marked with two thin drag marks stretching inward from the doorway. No incoming footprints marred the snow surface leading toward the building, confirming the entity could not possibly be his mother. Rational knowledge, however, did nothing to loosen the rigid paralysis gripping his body upon hearing that familiar voice. He pulled out his phone and reviewed the photograph he had taken of the station sign once again. Do not respond. Xiao Jin. The voice called out a second time, sounding far closer to the partition wall. Chun Jin's throat constricted painfully, yet he forced himself to remain silent. He tucked the enamel mug deeper into his bag and turned to locate the back exit. The entity behind the wall did not give chase as he moved away, only shifting its form of address into a softer tone against the wall surface. Ajin. That particular nickname froze Chun Jin's hand mid-grip on the back door handle. His mother rarely used this affectionate name for him, reserving it solely for moments following their petty arguments. He had never heard the term spoken again after her passing. He squeezed his eyes shut against the memories and twisted the door handle fully open. The back door opened onto a narrow alleyway. A pile of hardened discarded shoes stacked against the far end, with the door to a small coal furnace storage room hanging ajar. A faint, oily vapor seeped through the door crack, catching Chun Jin's attention. He did not step inside immediately, spotting a square metal fuel canister dragged across the floor with thick frost crusting its rim. He recognized the distinct scent of automotive fuel from his years working at the logistics park. The odor was unpleasant at best, yet infinitely more trustworthy than the phantom voice promising warm meals from behind the wall. Ajin. Chun Jin stood with his back pressed firmly against the dividing wall, hand resting on the back door handle without turning around. The warning carved on the station sign was no magical talisman. Remaining silent did not guarantee survival. If he answered the voice, he would reveal every emotional vulnerability the entity could exploit to torment him further. He retreated through the back door into the coal furnace storage room as the voice of his mother fell silent behind the wall. The absence of the mimic voice was no comfort. The entity had realized its verbal deception failed and would soon resort to alternative tactics to lure him out. He tied the rusted screw to a length of nylon cord and wrapped a stiff piece of shoe polish cloth around the metal fastener. A flick of the lighter ignited the fabric, releasing thick, black, acrid smoke. Chun Jin fed the burning cord through the furnace room door crack and dragged the smoldering bundle along the ground toward the far side of the enclosure. Ajin, don't leave me. The mimic voice lost its gentle warmth, a rough abrasive grit lining every syllable. Chun Jin paid no heed to the plea, steadily hauling the burning smoke source deeper into the storage room. Smoke billowed out from the crack, followed by the dragging shuffle of bare feet across crusted ice. Firelight illuminated the floor to reveal a pair of bluish, gray feet first, swollen with dark purple veins, yet leaving zero indentations within the snow beneath them. Further upward stretched stiff, frozen lower legs. The entity did not lunge for the flame instantly, only standing motionless in the doorway with its head bowed as if attempting to identify the source of the flickering light. Gray text surfaced at the edge of his vision. Frozen corpse vocal mimicry. Recreate sounds it has heard before. Reading the word recreate, the weight lingering heavy in Chun Jin's chest finally lifted. The entity was not his mother, nor did it know the content of their old arguments. It had merely picked up fragments of their quarrel somewhere, selecting the most fitting phrase to pry open his emotional guard. The imitation was uncannily precise, too precise for Chun Jin to pinpoint flaws in tone or pauses. He cut off the echoing voice, dragging the burning bolt deeper into the coal stove room. Only after the bluish, frozen feet retreated from the firelight did the system update its entry. It was then he confirmed the truth. There was no mother behind the partition, only a frozen corpse regurgitating voices it had once overheard. Chun Jin kept hauling the smoldering bolt inward. The corpse stirred abruptly, colliding its shoulder into a tall rack of worn shoes. The wooden frame crashed down, pinning one of its legs to the ground. It let out a guttural, inhuman groan yet stretched its hands desperately toward the flame. Seizing the opening, Chun Jin hooked the handle of an iron bucket with his hammer shaft and pulled it outward. The bucket was immensely heavy. Every strain from his injured left leg sent a tearing pain shooting through the wound. and the bucket's bottom scraped harshly against the threshold with a shrill screech. The corpse snapped its head upward, its fingers scrabbling wildly out from beneath the collapsed shoe rack. The burning fuse was nearly spent. Abandoning further confrontation, Chun-Jin flung the nylon cord aside, and the blazing bolt landed amid a pile of old cotton shoes. Flames flared instantly, filling the small room with thick smoke. The corpse lunged straight for the blaze, knocking another section of the shoe rack to rubble with its shoulder. "Carry on with what you're doing." Chun-Jin dragged the bucket back into the shoe repair shop, stinging smoke burning his eyes. He left the door slightly ajar and unlocked. Locks could never bar entities determined to break in, and would only become a hindrance if he needed a hasty escape later. He hauled the iron bucket behind the counter and scraped frost off the rim with a blade, triggering new system prompts. Automotive blended fuel low, temperature solidification compatible for train power systems. The fuel inside had hardened into a dark brown solid mass, with only a thin ring of liquid oil lining the inner edge. It was usable, yet impossible to feed into the train's fuel compartment in its current state. Chun-Jin fastened the lid shut, slumped against the counter, and sipped partially melted iced tea from an enamel mug. The frigid liquid offered no warmth to his core, though it soothed the raw, sandpaper-like ache in his throat. Glancing downward, he spotted a waterlogged scrap of paper lying beside the coal stove. Drawn on its reverse side was a rough map of the town's road network alongside short horizontal lines marking train carriages. One corner was blurred by moisture, leaving only 4 legible digits, 0792. Chun-Jin held off on messaging the contact labeled 0792. A number printed on a tattered scrap did not guarantee the person was present within this cursed town. A place capable of fabricating his father's voice could render any written note meaningless proof. He studied the front of the paper first, tracing a route leading from the shoe shop, bypassing the general store, and heading toward the northern platform. This safe passage to the station was the only valuable information on the map. Faint, water, eroded handwriting lingered on the paper's backside. Leaning close to the window for better light, he deciphered the faded message. "If you encounter 0792, do not let them board the train." Chun-Jin folded the paper away, refusing to treat the warning as absolute truth. He knew nothing of the note's author or their motives. Still, recalling the vintage ticket stamped with 0000 in the photograph linked to 0792, he tucked the map deep inside his inner pocket. Another heavy crash echoed from the coal stove room. The shoe rack tilted violently, flickers of fire seeping out from under the doorframe. Grabbing the fuel bucket and bearing weight on his wounded leg, Chun-Jin headed for the back exit. He now had both water and fuel. His next objective was to transport the supplies back to his damaged train carriage. As for 0792, surviving long enough to meet the contact came first. The green train carriage on the northern platform stood untouched, a red scarf wedged tight in the door crack resembling stiff, frozen fabric. Rather than approach directly, Chun-Jin borrowed Su Zhao's binoculars to scan the tracks. The carcass of the frozen hound was gone, leaving only a shallow drag mark leading toward the train wheels. Every window was coated in thick frost, no interior lights glowing to indicate whether another creature had already claimed the carriage ahead of him. "Leave the bucket behind that pillar." He handed the binoculars back to Su Zhao. "Keep watch over both approaches while I test the door." Chun-Jin tossed his small hammer into the carriage first. The metal clanged against a seat cushion with no responsive sound from within. Only then did he pry open the door slightly using a broken handrail. Frigid air washed over his face. The temporary thermal insulation had almost completely dissipated, leaving the metal walls icy and rigid to the touch. "Pass the bucket in, and stay clear of the door tracks." Su Zhao cradled the bucket to the doorway, hesitant to step inside. Chun-Jin reached out to take hold of the container. "You wait outside for now." The statement sounded harsh, but it was pragmatic. The carriage's functionality remained unconfirmed, and safeguarding the fuel bucket was critical. Su Zhao showed no resentment, merely holding the door open from the exterior. Chun-Jin slit the bucket open with his blade, revealing the clumped dark brown solid fuel with a thin layer of liquid oil pooled at the base. He looped a nylon cord around the bucket and slowly siphoned the usable liquid into the fuel reservoir beneath the seats. The very first drop seeped into the reservoir, sent a faint tremor rippling through the undercarriage. Dim crimson light ignited within the metal piping, mimicking frozen blood vessels finally restored to circulation. Warmth crept upward along his feet, and the heat searing his leg wound drew a sharp curse to his lips. Temporary thermal insulation layer. Calibrating stable, Thermal mode blue sustains baseline livable temperature when doors and windows are fully sealed. Consumes fuel continuously. Structural integrity takes priority if fuel reserves drop. Critically low frost began melting inward from the window edges, and the stiff red scarf softened slightly where it pressed against the door gap. Pressing his palm to the seat surface, Chun-Jin felt dry warmth for the first time. This was proper insulated shelter, far superior to the fleeting 39 minutes of residual heat he had experienced previously. New system notifications flashed at the periphery of his vision. Current occupants. 1 maximum baseline capacity. 2 fuel consumption will spike drastically upon entry of a third passenger. Su Zhao remained standing outside, wind whipping his camera bag against his legs. Instead of asking permission to board, he spoke calmly through the gap. 2 hostiles are moving toward us from the street intersection. Chun-Jin glanced at the dim amber indicator on the fuel gauge. The reserve looked precariously low. Adding a second occupant would strain fuel supplies for future scavenging runs. Even so, Su Zhao had proven invaluable. He drafted navigational paths, spotted threats from afar with binoculars, and cut the loose power wire atop the clock tower earlier. Abandoning him to the frozen wilderness was reckless, not resourceful. Come inside. Chun-Jin stepped aside. Wipe snow off your shoe soles, and do not touch the fuel reservoir. Upon entering, Su Zhao clutched his binoculars tightly, as if protecting his last intact possession. He settled into the innermost seat, his body stiffening the moment his back met the warm upholstery, before he released a long, weary breath. The last time I felt heat from a stove was at a refugee shelter, he murmured. Once the coal ran out, everyone still clustered around the cold stove long after. Chun-Jin pressed a damp tissue against his bleeding wound. Don't let this carriage turn into another shelter. Fuel suffices for 2 people only. A third passenger means we all freeze. Su Zhao nodded solemnly, offering no pleas for unknown strangers. He lifted the binoculars to scan the exterior and paused abruptly. Someone is photographing our position from the north. A private message pinged simultaneously at the edge of Chun-Jin's vision. 0792. There is a red scarf tucked into your green train carriage door. Is that correct? Attached was a long, distance photograph. Heavy snow haze blurred the scene, yet clearly captured the carriage door and the red fabric. Chun-Jin stared at the image, his fingers hovering over the message input box without replying immediately. An unknown observer had fixed their sights on his carriage, while he could not pinpoint their exact location. The fuel bucket had left a deep indentation in the snow as it was hauled through the back alley. The instant Chun-Jin rounded the corner, a glint of light flashed from the broken window of the street clock tower, sweeping directly across the bucket's lid. He was being watched. A second beam of light veered away from the bucket toward a narrow alley west of the tower. A hand appeared briefly in the window, palm pressed downward twice, a clear gesture warning him to avoid the main street entrance. Chun-Jin remained skeptical. He tossed a piece of coal slag into the western passage. The small stone clattered against the far wall with no hostile movement emerging from the shadows. Moments later, a lens cap dropped from the tower window into the snow, stained with fresh blood. Stowing the bucket behind the shoe shop door, Chun-Jin crept toward the clock tower. A man leaned over the second-floor windowsill, his weathered canvas jacket frayed at the cuffs. A camera slung around his neck. He held binoculars in his left hand, his right hand red and numb from bitter cold. Are you alone? Chun-Jin stood beneath the building's awning and questioned him. The man extended the binoculars outward. Observe the grain depot. Peering through the lens, Chun-Jin watched the metal roll-up shutter of the general store crack open. A man clutching a cardboard box stumbled out into the snow before being dragged backward by a blackened hand. Reaching from within the store's interior, the victim scratched desperately at the snow-covered ground. As his carton split open, spilling blocks of rock, hard instant noodles across the snow, the shutter slammed shut, trapping the man's lower body inside the building. Chun-Jin lowered the binoculars. My name is Su Zhao, the man in the tower said. The staircase is collapsed, with 3 frozen corpses patrolling the ground floor. I know their patrol routes around the tower, and I saw you remove the fuel bucket from the shoe shop. Guide me safely down, and I will draw out every safe path for you. What reason do I have to trust you with this favor? You need to return to the northern platform, and the western alley route is currently impassable. Half an hour ago, hostiles patrolled the stretch between the grain depot and this station. Traveling with that bucket now would lead you straight into them. Su Zhao's claim could not be verified instantly, yet his knowledge was undeniably useful. Chun-Jin instructed him to sketch the route onto the back of a discarded flyer, marking blind spots, silent zones, and safe corridors for transporting the heavy bucket. Wind whipped the paper violently, but Su Zhao's hand remained steady, his lines clean and unwavering. A system tag materialized above his head as Chen Jin studied the map. Steady precision with handheld objects long, range visual surveillance, physically incapable of harming living humans. The final tag appeared faded and muted gray. Chen Jin raised his gaze toward him. Do you carry a blade? Su Zhao pulled out a folding knife, its polished blade gleaming clean. Have you used it? Only to cut binding ropes. Then do not assume you know how to fight with it. Chen Jin tied one end of a nylon cord to a metal support beam, dropping the other length into the tower window for Su Zhao to climb down to the awning. Midway through his descent, the 3 frozen corpses at the tower entrance snapped their heads upward. 2 more were blocked by collapsed steel beams and circled through the snow. Su Zhao stepped onto loose metal sheeting, his body swinging suspended in midair as his folding knife slipped from his grasp into the snow below. The nearest corpse bent to pick up the knife and spoke directly toward him. Su Zhao. The voice was a perfect copy of his own. Su Zhao's grip slackened, nearly plummeting from the cord. Chen Jin hauled the line taut, the strain sending searing pain through his leg wound, and shouted sharply. Ignore the voice, climb down now. Su Zhao crashed onto his knees in the snow upon landing, too stunned to flee immediately. The corpse advanced toward him with the stolen knife. Though his face paled with terror, Su Zhao grabbed a cracked camera lens from his bag and slammed it hard into the creature's shoulder. The lens shattered across the snow, failing to incapacitate the corpse yet forcing it to spin aside. The distraction was sufficient. Su Zhao yanked loose an exposed overhead wire and looped it around a support pillar, tangling the wire around the corpse's knees. As the entity collapsed forward, Chen Jin swung his hammer hard into the back of its skull. Without stopping to retrieve the knife, the two fled back to the shoe shop along the concealed paths Su Zhao had mapped out. Su Zhao leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. A deep gash sliced open across his palm from the broken lens fragments. He stared at the shattered glass as if mourning a precious possession he had failed to protect. I foolishly thought the creature could feel pain, he whispered. It cannot. Chen Jin pressed the rusted bolt into his palm. If you cannot bring yourself to strike directly, learn to trip them, bar doors, and hurl debris. Even a split second of delay is better than standing defenseless waiting to be caught. Su Zhao closed his fingers around the bolt and nodded. Chen Jin turned to check the fuel bucket. It was intact, though a set of unnaturally long, slender human handprints marked the metal lid. Before departing, Su Zhao returned the rusted bolt to Chen Jin, his palms raw and crimson from frostbite. Su Zhao glanced toward the northern platform. The hostiles likely tracked the bucket scent and now know the location of your carriage. 0792. There is a red scarf tucked into your green train carriage door. Is that correct? Chen Jin did not dismiss the photograph sent by 0792. Zooming in, he made out crisp details of the scarf and carriage door through the snow haze. Whoever had taken the shot had targeted the entrance deliberately. Su Zhao matched the photo's angle to the carriage's orientation and swept the northern landscape with his binoculars. The clock tower stands west of this position. Photographs taken from the tower would only capture the carriage's side profile. This shot faces the door head on, meaning the photographer is most likely positioned among the abandoned northern train tracks. Can you narrow the exact spot down further? Not right now. Su Zhao shook his head. Heavy snowfall creates multiple viable vantage points facing the carriage. We would need to scout the area in person or wait for the wind to die down. Chen Jin held off replying to 0792. Capturing a photograph did not mean the sender was nearby. The image could easily have been forwarded through another person's account. Pressing for their location would only signal that their surveillance had unsettled him, serving no practical purpose. He minimized the photo overlay and gestured for Su Zhao to resume monitoring the northern perimeter. The carriage had warmed slightly, melting a ring of condensation along the window panes, while the fuel gauge still glowed a faint amber warning. Su Zhao sat pressed against the window, binoculars steady against the glass to avoid jostling the window latch. Every gust of wind made the red scarf flutter faintly in the door crack, a quiet reminder that their hard-won warmth would not last indefinitely. A flurry of new messages suddenly flooded the group channel. Users previously asking for water and medical supplies fell silent uniformly. All attention fixed on a single sender's handle. Hanshao, a coal storage warehouse, sits against the eastern exterior wall of the grain depot. Anyone retrieving coal may report to the north gate to meet my associates. Surrender 30% of your coal bricks, and my escorts will guide you safely across the northern snowfields directly to the train tracks. 0719. I made the crossing once under their guidance and returned safely to my carriage. The 30% levy is steep, yet preferable to freezing to death mid-journey hauling coal. 2033. Anyone unwilling to pay the fee may attempt the crossing alone. No one will stop you from facing whatever lurks outside the north gate. Chen Jin directed his gaze toward the grain depot. 2 rows of low buildings blocked a clear view of the north gate. Su Zhao adjusted his binocular focus and passed the device over. Observe the covered entryway. Through the lens, Chen Jin watched a man in a gray padded jacket sprint out from the grain depot's eastern wall, clutching 3 coal bricks. His boots skidded repeatedly across the snow as he reached the north gate awning, handing over his most intact coal brick to the guard stationed there. The guard stowed the coal in a canvas sack, tied a strip of white cloth around the man's wrist, then marched forward into a narrow alley armed with a steel pipe. The gray, jacketed man followed slowly with his remaining 2 coal bricks, glancing backward repeatedly with hesitation. The armed scout paused at every junction to survey the path ahead before waving the survivor onward. They navigated past an overturned freight vehicle and through snow-buried rails, eventually emerging into view directly behind the northern train carriages. The man arrived safely at the tracks with his remaining coal intact. The escort service actually delivers on its promise, Su Zhao commented. That is precisely why Han Xiao can demand payment. Chen Jin returned the binoculars. Word of the coal warehouse will spread quickly, making the coal itself easy to acquire. The true danger lies in the journey back. No one knows which snow drifts are stable and which paths are patrolled by frozen corpses. Han Zhao's 30% coal fee purchased safe navigation from the warehouse back to the carriages. Securing coal meant nothing if scavengers stumbled into hazards on the return trek. The gray-jacketed survivor served as living proof the service was legitimate. No one in the channel would learn the fate of those who refused payment and attempted the route unassisted. Su Zhao continued monitoring the north gate and lowered his voice suddenly. Another exit opens along the eastern alley. Have you traveled that path? I have not. Su Zhao tilted his binoculars toward the passage. I only spotted footprints leading outward with no matching tracks leading inward. The snow covering is thinner than along the north gate route. It could be a legitimate shortcut, or merely the trail left by someone fleeing in panic. Chen Jin forbade him from sharing this observation in the public channel. Visible footprints did not equate to a traversable route. The verified Northgate path had been tested safely by multiple travelers. Advertising an unproven alley as a shortcut was no different from the reckless advice 2033 gave, urging others to force open locked buildings remotely. Another message popped up in the channel. Han Xiao, a lookout is needed to monitor Western Alley activity along the abandoned northern tracks. Candidates must own binoculars and reliably observe street movements. Report to the Northgate for negotiation. 30 minutes of watch duty earns 1 block of train-grade coal. My team will escort you to the observation post and back afterward. Su Zhao's fingers paused against the binocular barrel. He stared out the window, then turned toward Chen Jin. He is hiring external observers to handle his perimeter watch. Exactly. 1 premium coal brick for 30 minutes of surveillance, plus safe escorted transit to and from the site. The terms are reasonable, but we need confirmation of the observation post location and what exactly we are tasked with monitoring before agreeing. Chen Jin studied the white cloth markers worn by Han Zhao's ground crew. The faction operated structured supply collection points and mapped safe return routes systematically. Su Zhao's binoculars were a valuable asset to their operation, while Han Xiao possessed rare train, compatible coal fuel, and secure passage through the hazardous northern zone. The arrangement was a mutually beneficial trade, with no one offering charity freely. Clarify all details first, Chen Jin cautioned. We are not obligated to perform labor for his faction. We withdraw immediately if the location is suspicious or any conditions shift unfavorably. Chen Jin composed a private message to Han Xiao. Chen Jin, where is the observation post situated? Han Xiao replied instantly with cold, transactional wording devoid of friendly pleasantries. Han Xiao, past the second fallen utility pole along the abandoned northern tracks, behind the collapsed masonry wall. Monitor the western alley for 30 minutes in exchange for 1 train-grade coal brick. My escorts will take you to the site and accompany you back to your carriage. Chen Jin, how is payment issued? Han Xiao, coal is delivered upon completion of the full 30-minute shift. Early departure results in no compensation, and you will be responsible for your own return journey. This was a straightforward, enforceable trade agreement. Su Zhao would man the observation post for half an hour for a coal brick to replenish their fuel reserves, with safe passage through the dangerous northern wasteland provided both ways. The elevated ground behind the collapsed wall marked on the faded map was the ideal vantage point to identify where 0792 had taken their photograph from the northern zone. We go to the observation post first. Shinjin nodded toward the photo of their carriage door. Someone surveilled our vehicle from the north, and we need to identify their exact position and check for additional observers nearby. We can respond to 0792 only after we gather this intelligence. Su Zhao hesitated for a moment. Setting down his binoculars, he touched the broken lens cap resting inside his camera bag before speaking. What if Han Zhao's people alter the agreed terms once we arrive? We leave on the spot. Shinjin tucked his small hammer into his waistband. We only committed to 30 minutes of watch duty. Any unexpected surcharges or additional tasks will void our arrangement entirely. Their words carried little real resolve. The fuel indicator inside the carriage glowed a dim amber. If they got trapped outside the north gate, trouble would still find them. Even so, laying down their boundaries up front was better than feigning ignorance halfway through their errand. Neither hurried to step outside right away. Su Zhao peered through the window, mapping the path from the northern abandoned rails to the collapsed wall, confirming the second toppled utility pole stood clearly within sight. Shinjin pressed the scarf tighter into the door crack, split the remaining hard biscuits into 2 portions, handed one to Su Zhao, and stowed the other in his pack. Neither spoke of this being rations for their risky outing. The dry, brittle biscuits scratched their throats going down, yet faltering and growing weak once they ventured farther out would only leave them vulnerable. Han Zhao's men arrived sooner than they had anticipated. A man in a gray cap halted outside the carriage. He made no effort to knock, simply stood 2 paces off and raised his bandage, wrapped wrist for them to see. Su Zhao lifted his binoculars to scan the area behind him. No other figures dotted the snow to the north, though someone brandished a steel pipe beneath a distant rain shelter. Are you leading us to the observation spot? Shinjin called through the closed door. The gray, capped man nodded. Collapsed wall. 30 minutes of watch time. You get the coal briquette afterward and head back through the north gate. What if we run into threats along the way? Detour if you can't avoid them. Run for your lives if detours aren't possible. The man paused, adding flatly, I won't shield anyone from harm. Understood. Shinjin replied through the door. Lead the way. We'll look out for ourselves. The gray, capped man said nothing more. Shinjin pried the door open a narrow gap, letting Su Zhao step out first before grabbing his small hammer and following suit. Once they resecured their scarves over their faces, their guide turned toward the northern stretch of land. He stuck strictly to the role of a guide for the whole trek. Where snowdrifts piled high, he prodded the banks with his steel pipe to test stability before stepping across. When they passed 2 shuttered low buildings, he gestured them away from the building walls, motioning for them to walk down the center of the road. Su Zhao asked no questions, committing every bend and corner to memory while keeping his binoculars slung close to his chest. Past the second fallen utility pole stood a brick wall crumbled down one side. The small elevated ground behind it afforded a clear view of their green rail carriage, as well as an overlook covering the northern disused tracks and the entrance to West Alley. Shinjin first checked on their carriage. The red scarf still jammed the door seam, and a thin layer of mist frosted the windows, visible even from this distance. The photograph numbered 0792 had been taken from a similar vantage point, though not an exact match. Whoever snapped the picture had stood lower to the ground and much nearer the railway tracks. Su Zhao knelt and brushed snow away with the back of his hand. A faint trail of footprints marked the ridge of the high ground, leading upward from the abandoned rails, then sloping back down the far side of the hill. The prints were narrower than the gray, capped man's footwear, with deep indentations at the forefoot, evidence someone had lingered here for a while before departing in a rush. Their guide remained on the opposite side of the broken wall, refusing to draw near. He merely pointed toward West Alley. Start your clock now. Su Zhao trained his binoculars on the alley mouth, while Shinjin fixed his gaze on the newly uncovered footprints. Crosswinds were already driving snow into the indentations. Soon, even these faint traces would vanish entirely. He did not give chase. Instead, he pressed the toe of his boot beside the prints to memorize their exact distance from the base of the wall. Someone had reached this observation point shortly before them. Biting horizontal winds whipped around the collapsed wall. Frost instantly rimmed the outer casing of Su Zhao's binoculars the moment he pressed them to his eyes. He did not wipe the ice away immediately, tugging his scarf higher over the bridge of his nose to scan West Alley first, then sweeping his view north along the fractured wall. The gray, capped man stood 2 steps away, the tip of his steel pipe planted firmly in the snow, neither rushing them nor offering to assist with their surveillance. The curtain on that single-story building to the left just moved, Su Zhao whispered sharply. Chen Jin followed his line of sight. A tear gaped in the building's window paper, the interior swallowed in total darkness with no human silhouette discernible. A faint drag mark scored the snow piled before the doorway, stretching deep into the alley. Without Su Zhao's warning, he would have dismissed the mark as a hollow groove carved by wind. A living person inside. Hard to tell. Su Zhao adjusted his binocular focus inward slightly. Fresh snow has settled over the drag mark, meaning whatever left that trail passed some time ago. There's no way to confirm if the curtain shifted from someone inside moving it, or just wind seeping through cracks in the rear window. He refocused his lenses firmly on the alley entrance. Chen Jin nodded, holding him back from investigating the building further. Keeping the alley under watch was their sole objective. Chasing down faint movements would render their deal with Han Xiao meaningless. West Alley looked far narrower from ground level than it had from their elevated perch. Flanking low buildings funneled the wind into a blinding white torrent, stinging snow grains streaking horizontally beneath the eaves. An overturned wooden cart pinned a splintered door panel at the alley mouth, and a blackened, frozen foot jutted out from behind the wood, a frayed cotton sock still clinging around the ankle. Su Zhao's binoculars locked onto the foot, the muscles on the back of his hand tightening with tension. Don't fixate on it, Chen Jin cautioned. Scan what lies behind the cart. Su Zhao blinked, readjusting his viewing angle. No other limbs peeked out behind the wreckage, and no fresh footprints marred the snow surface. Only broken streaks of cold dust smudged along the base of the wall, trailing deep into the alley. He studied the trail for nearly 10 seconds before speaking quietly. Multiple people walked through the alley. Snow covered their footprints, but the cold dust trails are still exposed. At those words, the gray, capped man tapped his pipe twice against the snow and held up a hand to signal them to halt. He circled around the collapsed wall to glance toward the alley entrance, then raised his pipe horizontally across his chest. A scraping, dragging sound echoed out of the alley depths. It was not the sound of footsteps, but the dull scrape of a heavy sack being hauled along the ground, bumping repeatedly against the wall before moving sluggishly onward. The noise rounded past the single-story building and came to a stop beside the overturned cart. The black foot protruding from the snow twitched inward a fraction, the cotton sock scraping across the door panel to leave a dark, damp smudge. Su Zhao's breath caught in his throat, yet he never lowered his binoculars. Ignoring the twitching foot, he angled his lenses beneath the cart. Chen Jin could make out nothing from his vantage, only watching Su Zhao's expression harden little by little. It isn't a corpse, Su Zhao stated. Someone is trapped under the cart, and their leg is still mobile. Without turning his head, the gray, capped man held up 2 fingers and jabbed them toward the north gate. Leave now. Chen Jin rooted himself to the spot, resisting the urge to approach the cart. Their agreement only required them to monitor West Alley for Han Xiao for 30 minutes, with their guide tasked with navigation and collecting their report. Saving the person trapped beneath the cart fell outside the bounds of their bargain. Still, the dragging noises behind the cart drew nearer, metal scraping against packed snow. If the captive was still alive, they would not survive much longer to make even a faint sound for help. What is being dragged behind the cart? He questioned the guide. I have no knowledge of it, the gray, capped man replied. You've walked this route before. Having traveled the path does not oblige me to inspect every hidden corner. The man shot him a cold glance, his bandaged wrist resting atop the steel pipe. Watching the alley is your assigned task. Report whatever you observe to me. I will not rescue the person under that cart. Chen Jin's gaze locked onto the foot twitching once more beneath the cart, ready to press the issue, when a woman's desperate cry suddenly rang out from deep within West Alley. Is anyone out there? Please get this door open for me. Her voice emanated from the single-story building, trembling with urgency as it collided with the posted warning, do not respond. Su Zhao's fingers squeezed hard around his binoculars, nearly knocking the device against the stone wall. Chen Jin clamped a hand over his wrist to silence any sound he might make. The woman called out again, her words identical, even the pauses for breath matching exactly as before. The gray, capped man stepped backward half a pace, dragging a sharp line through the snow with the tip of his pipe. Abandoning the cart entirely, Chen Jin tilted his head towards Su Zhao. The two edged backward along the broken wall until snow haze swallowed the alley entrance, at which point a dull thud carried to their ears, the sound of the door panel being smashed open by some unknown force. Su Zhao glanced over his shoulder, his lips parting without uttering a single word. Did you get a clear look under the cart just now? Chen Jin asked. Not fully, Su Zhao murmured. I only saw them clutching something that resembled a train ticket. Chen Jin's footsteps faltered. The blank numbered ticket marked 0000 had first led them to contact 0792, the stray ticket slipping from a severed hand bearing the warning, "Do not open the car door," scrawled on its reverse. He was unwilling to risk doubling back for the unknown figure trapped under the cart. The woman's cries were either mimicked sounds from frozen remains or proof of a real person trapped indoors. Either scenario left them with no safe way to enter that building. The 30-minute surveillance window expired, and the gray-capped man granted them not a single extra second. He pulled a dark gray coal briquette from his canvas bag, weighing it in his palm briefly before handing it to Qin. The briquette was modest in size with crumbled edges, yet solid and heavy to the touch. "Follow the original route back to the north gate." Qin accepted the fuel block, but lingered instead of leaving immediately. He pointed toward the snow-buried abandoned rails below the high ground. "That photograph was taken over there, not from this wall." The gray-capped man tracked his pointing finger with a blank expression. "A train carriage derailed and crashed down there some time ago. What remains of it now? The carriage hull is gone, but other items were left behind." He turned on his heel after speaking, clearly unwilling to offer further information for their small errand. Staring at the man's retreating back, Qin squeezed the coal briquette in his grasp. Retracing their original path back to the carriage was the safest option, the faint amber glow of their fuel gauge waiting for their return. And yet the photograph from Contact 0792 had lured them to this northern zone, with Su Zhao confirming the photographer had stood lower and closer to the railway tracks. This stretch of abandoned rails was their only lead that aligned with the evidence they had found so far. "Give me 5 minutes, Qin said. "Stay up on the wall and keep watch for me. Tap a piece of sheet metal twice if you spot any danger. Don't call my name." Su Zhao skipped the obvious question of whether Qin could manage alone, lifting his binoculars straight away. "The snow layer to your left is hollow underneath. Step only along the exposed railway tracks to your right." Qin tucked the coal briquette into the bottom of his pack and probed the snow with a pry bar. The smooth snow surface concealed loose, unstable drifts. When the bar sank into the bank, a hollow thud echoed, as if striking thin sheet iron. He followed Su Zhao's navigational instructions, circling around a carriage roof protruding from the snow to spot half a green train carriage wedged sideways into a snow gully. The carriage hull had been torn open along one side, its seats, luggage racks, and shattered glass scattered across the surrounding snow. Most wreckage was buried under drifts, with only trivial debris sticking out: cracked vacuum flasks, waterlogged cloth bundles, a child's shoe, clumps of stuck-together train tickets, and a broken lanyard meant for employee ID badges. No fresh blood stained the area, nor were there any recent footprints. Still, Qin pulled out the photograph from 0792. The dark stretch of railway track in the photo's bottom right corner, paired with the slanted window frame in the distance, lined up perfectly with the wrecked carriage in the snow gully. Whoever had taken that photograph had definitely stood right here. He knelt down without reaching blindly into the debris. The wreckage was mixed with belongings left by countless strangers. Reaching into the mess might uncover supplies, or the rigid, frozen hand of another victim. Using a metal claw tool, he brushed away the top layer of tickets and rags, sorting each item aside one by one. A flattened old backpack split open along its zipper, revealing half a faded gray cotton glove tucked inside. A plastic numbered tag was stitched to the glove's wrist cuff, its surface worn smooth by exposure to the elements. Yet its 4 printed digits remained legible. 0792. Qin held back from touching the glove directly, a system prompt materializing unbidden before his eyes. Worn cotton glove serial number 0792, permanently waterlogged by snow. Incapable of retaining body heat, he froze mid-motion, the metal claw hovering suspended above the glove. The map had marked the identifier 0792. The photograph originated from this very spot, and now a physical glove stamped with the same number had surfaced. Meanwhile, the user labeled 0792 in their messaging feed still sent distress signals, shared photographs, and asked whether opening the carriage door was the right choice. He had no answer for whether serial numbers could be duplicated, nor where the person behind the screen actually resided. 2 sharp knocks suddenly echoed down from the edge of the snow gully. Clang, clang, the warning signal from striking sheet metal. Qin immediately scooped the glove into an empty plastic bag and stuffed it into his pack, scrambling upward along the exposed railway tracks. As he climbed over the jutting carriage roof, he spotted Su Zhao crouched behind the broken wall, binoculars still trained outward, one hand pressed against a loose sheet of metal. "Someone emerged from West Alley," Su Zhao reported. "Not one of Han Zhao's crew. A lone figure with a backpack, moving quickly toward these abandoned rails. Did you get a clear view of their face? Their face was covered by a scarf. Their boot prints are slightly wider than the set we found up on the high ground. Definitely a different person. Chen Jin tightened the shoulder straps of his pack, choosing not to give chase. Multiple unknown parties were scavenging this northern territory and monitoring their train carriage. Pursuing the stranger would only alert them to Chen Jin and Su Zhao's presence within the rail wreckage. The two retreated back to the collapsed wall, finding their gray-capped guide already walking ahead without pausing to wait for them. Chen Jin made no attempt to call out, securing the coal briquette safely in his bag as he and Su Zhao followed their original trail toward the north gate. Snow whipped into fiercer gusts as Su Zhao walked half a step ahead, casting regular glances back toward the abandoned rails. Chen Jin pressed his palm against the cold glove inside his pack, the hard plastic number tag digging into his palm like a solid shard of unmelted ice. A private message notification lit up their device as they rounded the second toppled utility pole. 0792. Are you still at the platform? Chen Jin ignored the message, and another arrived moments afterward. 0792. My father has stopped knocking at the door, and there's no sound coming from my mother's side anymore. Have you seen either of them out there? Chen Jin halted at this second message. He had never agreed to search for the person's family, nor would he send a hollow reply stating he had seen nothing. Instead, he laid the glove flat on the snow, snapped a photograph focusing on the numbered tag, and sent the image via private message. Chen Jin found this among the northern abandoned rails. Do you recognize it? No reply came from 0792 for a long stretch of time. The outline of the Northgate Range shelter grew visible in the distance, with the gray-capped man standing beneath it striking chunks of thin ice with his steel pipe. Su Zhao glanced at Chen Jin, then toward the unread message alert glowing at the corner of his vision, holding back the questions burning on his tongue. At long last, the messaging interface illuminated with a new response. 0792. This glove does not belong to my parents. A second message popped up mere seconds later. 0792. It's mine. The gray-capped man stopped walking once he reached the outer perimeter of the Northgate Range shelter. Follow the railway tracks north from here, he instructed, gesturing toward compacted boot prints stamped into the snow. Keep clear of the row of low buildings on your left. Gaps in their windows provide a direct line of sight onto this path. Chen Jin peered into the shelter interior. An iron stove burned weakly beneath a canvas tarp, yet a crowd huddled around its faint warmth. Some clutched coal briquettes waiting to trade for passage back into the safe zone. Others sat atop wooden crates rubbing numb hands for warmth. A woman knelt on the ground, tightly wrapping a blood-stained cloth bandage around another person's forearm to stem their bleeding. The gray-capped man made no move to bring them into the shelter, tucking his steel pipe under his arm. Do not mention my involvement in guiding you once you return to your carriage. Why? Su Zhao asked. Word will spread your carriage holds warmth, and crowds will badger me for safe passage tomorrow. With that explanation, the gray-capped man vanished into the snow haze surrounding the shelter. Su Zhao watched his retreating form and spoke quietly. He never demanded extra coal for his services. He has no need to, Chen Jin replied, pressing the coal briquette deeper into his pack. Word will spread about safe passage through the North Gate, and those seeking entry will willingly trade coal for his guidance. The pair trekked back along the railway tracks. Abandoned train carriages lined the northern stretch, buried deep under snow with thick frost sealing their windows. Only the corner window of their own carriage glowed with faint amber light. Drawing near, they found the red scarf still wedged firmly in the door crack, its fabric stiffened by frost and untouched by outsiders. Chen Jin did not unlock the door immediately. He positioned Su Zhao beside the carriage wall while tapping the door twice with his small hammer. No response echoed from inside the carriage, only cold air seeping through gaps in the door frame carrying the metallic tang of old rusted sheet iron. He pulled the scarf partially free, pried the door open a narrow slit, and tossed his pack onto the opposite seat first. The coal briquette clanged heavily against the seat cushion. Silence hung heavy within the carriage. Get in, Chen Jin ordered. Su Zhao slipped sideways into the carriage, slamming the door shut behind him. Chen Jin jammed the scarf back into the crack, wedging broken handrails and rusted screws into the frame to seal the gap down to a thin sliver. He then knelt beside the seats to lift the cover of the auxiliary fuel compartment. Beneath the panel, a dark red metal tube glowed dimmer than it had before they left the carriage. A square slot lined with fine dust sat inside the fuel compartment, sized to perfectly fit the coal briquette. Chen Jin scraped away the dust with his metal claw, cupping the briquette in his palm and sliding it slowly into the slot. A soft hum resonated from within the metal tube as the briquette lodged halfway into place. He froze to scan his surroundings. No smoke billowed forth. No fuel leaked from the piping. After several tense seconds, he pushed the coal briquette fully into its locked position. Coal briquette successfully connected to carriage fuel system. Stable thermal fuel reserves have increased. Warmth slowly spread across the floorboards of the carriage. Fresh frost coating the windows softened first, melting into water droplets that trickled down the glass surface. Feeling returned gradually to Chun-Jin's toes, the sudden warmth triggering a sharp twinge of pain that made him jerk his feet inward instinctively. Heat washed over the gash on his left leg, sending a stinging needle, like ache through the fabric of his trousers and into his raw flesh. He lowered himself onto the edge of the seat and rolled his trouser cuff upward. Paper towels had crusted to the open wound, their edges stained black with dried blood that tore loose with faint streaks of old fluid as he peeled them away. The injury itself was not deep, yet the flesh had never fully sealed shut. Hauling the coal briquette across the snow had split the wound open once more, fresh blood seeping steadily down his calf. Su Zhao set his binoculars aside to stare at the bleeding laceration. Paper towels are no longer suitable for dressing this wound. The strain of carrying the briquette tore it open again. You need stitches. I'm aware. Chun-Jin crumpled the blood-soaked towels without discarding them onto the carriage floor. That's why I planned to message 4410 the moment we got back. He opened his private messaging panel, hovering his finger over the text input box. Previously in the public channel, Contact 4410 had traded a suture kit for a half-night of carriage warmth. Chun-Jin had turned down the deal back then, his fuel gauge barely flickering dim amber. Now that the coal briquette powered their heating system, only 2 people occupied the carriage space. The system had warned that a third occupant would drastically accelerate fuel consumption. A single piece of coal was not enough to safely host another person inside the carriage. It would only suffice to mend his leg before the wound turned septic. Chun-Jin, are you still willing to trade for your suture kit? 4410 did not reply instantly. Su Zhao stared out the window toward the north gate for a moment before passing his binoculars over to Chun-Jin. A new person has arrived at the rain shelter. Peering through the lenses, Chun-Jin saw the bleeding woman from earlier standing upright, her palms coated in fresh blood as she stabilized an injured person's arm against a wooden plank. Further inside the shelter, 4410 knelt beside the metal stove, head bowed as they sorted spools of medical thread. 2 wounded people queued before them, one clutching a wounded shoulder, another with a blood-soaked trouser leg leaving long bleeding drag marks across the snow with every step. Chun-Jin's private message alert lit up the screen at that exact moment. 4410, I still have the suture kit, but I cannot trade it right now. Chun-Jin, are you stationed at the Northgate Rain Shelter? 4410, yes. Multiple injured people are gathered here, and Han Xiao has tasked me with stitching their wounds. My medical supplies are reserved for them for the time being. Chun-Jin refocused his binocular view on the crowded shelter. None of these wounded survivors had secured entry into any heated carriage, nor waited for a stranger to unlock a door for them. They simply queued beside the stove, waiting for 4410 to mend their injuries one by one. Chun-Jin, what payment is Han Xiao offering you for this work? 4410, 1 coal briquette for every wound sutured. The injured also gained safe passage back through the north gate afterward. Chun-Jin chose not to extend an offer for 4410 to come to their carriage. He and Su Zhao already occupied the limited heated space, and the newly installed coal briquette would burn through reserves far quicker if a third person crossed their threshold. Su Zhao set the binoculars down on the seat. She chose not to sell her medical kit directly to Han Xiao. Correct. Chun-Jin rolled his trouser cuff back down to apply light pressure over his bleeding wound. She's trading her suturing skills at the north gate to earn coal and safe passage home. Su Zhao watched the line of injured people waiting beneath the shelter without adding another word. Another figure stepped into the glow of the shelter lantern outside the window. The gray-capped guide escorted the newcomer to the stove without offering physical support or extra information. The survivor placed a coal briquette atop a wooden crate before rolling up their sleeve to present their wound to 4410. Chun-Jin watched the entire exchange unfold before sending a short reply to 4410. Chun-Jin, focus on your work for now. Do not let anyone tamper with your medical needles and thread. A quick, understood, appeared as a reply from 4410 moments later. Silence settled thickly across the carriage. Su Zhao wiped frost residue from his binoculars and stowed the device inside his camera bag. Chun-Jin split open the remaining package of biscuits, passing several larger pieces to Su Zhao while keeping only the smallest crumbs for himself. The cold briquette had stabilized the carriage heating, yet their stomachs remained empty, and the dull ache in Chun Jin's leg persisted. The warm lantern glow of the Northgate shelter hovered not far in the distance, yet they had no access to sterile suturing tools nor a spot among the crowds huddled around the public stove. He pulled the plastic bag holding the old glove out onto the seat surface. The cotton fabric had hardened after being soaked and frozen by snow, with a thicker, coarser stitch running along the base of the thumb. Clear evidence of a later makeshift repair job. Chun Jin raised a small blade to slice open the reinforced seam when a new private message popped up from 0792. 0792. Do not cut into the glove. Chun Jin froze with the blade suspended millimeters above the fabric seam, pausing his movement entirely. 0792. Something has been sewn inside the thumb of the glove. Chun Jin, what is this? 0792 replied right away. 0792. A torn ticket fragment. 0792. My father sewed it inside for me. Don't cut it open from the outside. The stitching is secured inward. Su Zhao leaned forward for a closer look without touching the glove. He shifted his camera bag to the opposite seat to make room for Chun Jin. Can it be unpicked? Yeah. Chun Jin turned the glove inside out. A short length of gray thread was tucked within the thumb fabric, lighter in shade than the glove's original aged stitching. The thread end was buried deep inside the cotton batting, nearly impossible to detect by touch alone. He did not use a blade. The dull tip of his hardened claw worked perfectly to tease the thread loose bit by bit. His first attempt failed. The glove's inner batting had frozen solid over time, hardened into a thin felt-like layer. On the second try, the thread slackened half an inch. Pinching the loose end between two fingers, Chun Jin pulled steadily outward. The gray thread unwound in loops from the base of the thumb. When the last loop came free, a tiny folded scrap of paper dropped onto his palm. Encased in a thin plastic sheet, the paper had yellowed along its edges, yet the outer plastic covering remained mostly intact. Chun Jin set it on his palm, making no immediate move to unwrap it. For faint, barely legible numbers were printed on the exposed side of the paper slip. 0000. Su Zhao's outstretched hand froze above the glove. His gaze drifted first to the pocket on Chun Jin's chest, where the old train ticket recovered from the frozen corpse also sat, marked with that very same sequence of digits on its front face. It's this number again, Su Zhao muttered. Chun Jin said nothing. He peeled back a corner of the plastic wrapping and unfolded the paper, revealing only half of an original ticket. Its surface had faded to an off-white from prolonged water damage, while its reverse side bore several lines of handwriting scrawled in ballpoint pen. The writer had pressed down hard as they wrote, roughening the paper fibers on the back side. Keep her out of the heated carriage. A second line sat beneath it, most of the characters washed away by water. Only 2 characters could be deciphered. She will. Chun Jin stared at those incomplete words, his fingertip resting against the ticket fragment's edge as he refrained from scraping at the waterlogged paper residue. He sent a blunt question via private message. Chun Jin, who is she? It took more than 10 seconds for 0792 to respond. 0792, my mother. 0792. Father handed me this ticket after writing the note. He told me to hide it well and never let my mother find it. Warm air seeped upward slowly from beneath the carriage seats, yet the half-ticket resting in Chun Jin's palm felt colder than the snow raging outside the train. 0792 had mentioned before that his parents ate tainted meat sold by the individual known as 0719. Later, his father appeared outside the door, accompanied by knocks coming from within the walls. Back then, Chun Jin only understood that the exterior door must never be opened. Now, holding this torn ticket fragment, he learned 0792's father had taken precautions to bar his mother from the heated carriage long before the disaster unfolded. 2 critical questions still lingered unanswered. Why this ticket shard had ended up inside the derailed carriage along the northern abandoned tracks, and how 0792 had known Chun Jin had retrieved it. Chun Jin, when was the last time you had this glove? The incoming message lagged for a long while this time. Su Zhao held back his inquiries and glanced out the carriage window instead. Flickering flames rose and fell in the stove beneath the Northgate shelter, buffeted by wind. The man in the gray hat walked past the low outbuilding with 2 companions. One of the 2 moved sluggishly, his right hand constantly pressed to his injured ribs. 0792. The day father gave me the glove. 0792. I fell asleep afterward. When I woke up, the glove was gone, and father was standing right outside the door. Chun Jin read the reply and chose not to press follow-up questions about where he had slept or his father's current state. 0792's fragmented accounts were already jumbled. His father, mother, knocking noises behind walls, distant photographs, plus this misplaced ticket fragment found amid derailed wreckage. None of these mysteries could be untangled through brief, private messages. He slid the ticket back into its plastic sleeve and left the glove unsewn. Rather than stowing the worn glove deep inside his bag, he laid it beside his hand within easy reach. If the glove had already vanished from 0792's possession only to resurface along abandoned tracks, it would not stay confined in a hidden pocket. Concealing it out of sight would only make it easier for whoever tracked the item to seize it undetected. Su Zhao reread the warning. Keep her out of the heated carriage, printed on the ticket reverse before speaking. The map bears the instruction, keep them off the carriages. Could these two warnings refer to the same group of people? Possibly, Chen Jin replied. Or someone deliberately altered the singular her into the plural them. Do you believe 0792 is lying to us? I have no way to confirm that. Chen Jin tucked the ticket fragment back into its plastic bag. What I do know is he was aware the ticket was hidden inside the glove, and his father was in possession of a ticket marked 0000. We secure every clue we can verify before rushing to pass judgment on anyone. Su Zhao nodded, discarding the assumption that they could locate 0792 immediately. Separated only by a numeric codename, Chen Jin had limited means to investigate. Venturing to the northern scrap rails to inspect the derailed carriage would neither retrieve 0792 nor mend the open wound on his left leg. He glanced down at his trouser leg. Dark red blood had seeped through the tissue pressed against the injury, saturating its outer edges completely. Chen Jin replaced the blood-soaked tissue, rinsed his fingertips with cold tea melted inside an enamel mug, then fastened the mug lid tightly shut. The injured survivors are still queuing up for treatment by the north gate, Su Zhao said. 4410 is overwhelmed with work. Let her tend to the wounded as needed. Chen Jin wrapped the used tissue and the removed gray thread together inside an empty biscuit wrapper. We have no needle, thread, or surplus fuel to spare. Intervening now would add another patient waiting for sutures with no real help to offer. Though his words sounded harsh, Su Zhao voiced no rebuttal. He raised his binoculars once more toward the north gate shelter. The moment he adjusted the lens, his shoulders suddenly tensed. Chen Jin, what is it? The gray, hatted man is no longer visible outside the shelter. Su Zhao passed the binoculars over, lowering his voice. One of the two men who followed him has also disappeared. Chen Jin took the binoculars to scan the area. Only a lone man remained beside the stove at the shelter perimeter, clutching a stack of coal bricks. Both the gray, hatted stranger and the injured man had vanished entirely. Wind swept the snow blanketing the ground between the low shacks smooth and featureless, erasing all trace of their path. Right at that moment, two knocks echoed against the carriage door. The sound was distinct from the scraping of frozen hounds or wind shoving the red scarf wedged in the door crack. A voice carried through the metal panel from outside the carriage. Chen Jin, the Northgate personnel request your presence immediately. Chen Jin, the Northgate personnel request your presence immediately. After the man outside finished speaking, the red scarf remained jammed in the door gap. A broken handrail jammed the door track, secured further by rusted screws lodged deep within the mechanism. Chen Jin sat anchored on the carriage seat, fresh tissue covering his leg wound while old blood stains lingered damp on his trousers. Neither he nor Su Zhao moved to stand. Su Zhao gripped the binoculars firmly in his grasp. Who sent you? Chen Jin called through the door. The person outside paused briefly. Personnel from the north gate. 4410 dispatched me to fetch you. Su Zhao's brows knitted together. It was plausible for 4410 to send a messenger while stitching up casualties inside the shelter. Yet she had messaged moments earlier stating she lacked spare needle and thread, making this sudden summons by an unknown stranger far too convenient to be genuine. Chen Jin kept his hands clear of the door and scrolled his message history to send a direct query to 4410. Chen Jin, did you send someone to look for me? When no door opened after several seconds of waiting, the messenger spoke again. Your leg wound cannot be left untreated. Medical supplies including suture thread are available at the north gate. 4410 instructed you to bring half a brick of coal in exchange for treatment. The messenger's story sounded credible, even naming the required trade item. Chen Jin glanced down at his injured calf. Bleeding had slowed after applying fresh tissue, but a sharp throbbing pain pulsed from deep within the laceration. Sutures were necessary for the wound, and 441 truly possessed the required medical supplies within the shelter. This messenger was simply exploiting two factual details to lure him outside the locked carriage. 4410, I sent no one. Chen Jin's hovering finger paused the instant this reply popped up on his interface. A second message followed straight after. 4410. The gray-hatted man just led an injured survivor toward the grain depot. I am still stationed at the shelter and have not dispatched anyone to your carriage. Chen Jin closed his phone against his palm and withheld news of this confirmation from the person outside. He tilted his chin towards Su Zhao as a silent signal. Su Zhao understood at once, wiping frost from the northern window pane with his sleeve before carefully positioning the binoculars at the opening. The messenger remained rooted outside the door. Chen Jin, the man called again. Can you hear me? The voice belonged to a young man, his throat raw and parched from the bitter cold, lacking the shaky, drawn-out vocal inflections of mutated frozen creatures. Still, a human voice did not guarantee honest intentions. Chen Jin had already fallen for a similar trick once before and would not leave this carriage vulnerable a second time. You claim 4410 sent you, Chen Jin said. What exact message did she give you to deliver? Silence hung outside for a beat before the reply came. She told me to bring you over to get your wounds stitched. Which leg is injured? The messenger fell silent, unable to answer. Chen Jin's leg injury was hardly a secret. Multiple Northgate survivors had witnessed him hauling coal bricks with a limp. Had 441 genuinely sent this messenger, she would have specified the wounded leg rather than relying on vague guesswork about an unspecified leg injury. Su Zhao lowered the binoculars and whispered, I cannot make out his facial features. He is standing in a blind spot beside the door with no white cloth wrapped around his wrist. The gray-hatted man had worn a strip of white fabric wrapped around his wrist during his earlier movement through the camp. While the absence of this cloth did not definitively mark the messenger as an outsider, it gave Chen Jin ample reason to keep the door sealed shut. 4410 never sent you, Chen Jin stated plainly. The messenger did not argue immediately. Wind whistled through gaps between train carriages, rippling the edges of the red scarf stuck in the door crack. After a pause, the man altered his approach. The gray-hatted man sent me. He says there is an item along the northern abandoned tracks that you need to identify. At the mention of the northern scrap rails, Chen Jin's gaze drifted to the old glove and plastic bag resting on the seat. The messenger had no way of knowing what he had extracted from the glove minutes prior, yet they were aware of his visit to the derailed tracks and sought to bait him out using that location. Tell him to come here himself, Chen Jin replied. He is occupied elsewhere. Then he may come when his schedule frees up. The messenger's breathing grew heavier, as if holding back a surge of anger. Chen Jin waited for him to continue speaking, his small hammer held loosely at the ready. Su Zhao kept the binoculars trained on the window. The moment the messenger stepped away from the door, they could track his destination. Just then, a private message from Han Xiao appeared on his interface. Han Xiao, no personnel from the North Gate were dispatched to your location. Chen Jin read those 5 words without rushing to craft a response. Han Xiao. The gray-hatted man headed toward the grain depot with his wounded companion and would never detour to your carriage door. Do not open the door for anyone claiming affiliation with Northgate staff. Subtle fabric rustling sounds from within the carriage must have carried outward, for the messenger's tone hardened abruptly. If you refuse to trust me, I can leave the item at your doorstep. You only need to step outside to retrieve it. What item is it? Something recovered from the abandoned tracks. Chen Jin's fingers tightened faintly around his palm. The scrap rails held 0792's glove, the torn 0000 ticket fragment, plus footprints left by whoever had lingered outside this carriage earlier. This messenger's timed mention of recovered track debris was far too coincidental to be random chance. He neither agreed to the proposal nor pressed for further details. Anyone with genuine evidence would willingly name the object in question. Those merely intent on luring him outside would only gain more talking points with each question he asked. The messenger waited a short while longer before speaking with clear impatience. You are not coming out. I will not, Chen Jin answered firmly. A quiet, muffled laugh drifted through the metal door. Very well. Your carriage door is locked tight enough. Footsteps retreated across the snow, heading north a short distance before grinding to a halt. Su Zhao instantly repositioned the binoculars through the carriage gap to track movement. He is walking toward the low outbuildings, Su Zhao reported. He did not head for the north gate. Chen Jin pushed himself upright, a sharp pull on his calf injury forcing him to grip the seat back for support. He made no attempt to give chase, instead shoving the red scarf deeper into the door crack. Though the messenger had left, a fresh damp patch marked the scarf right beside the door lock, left by a gloved hand dusted with melting snow touching the material moments earlier. Su Zhao's face paled upon spotting the damp mark. Was he testing the door's integrity this entire time? He did attempt entry, Chun Jin touched the outer edge of the door track using a tattered glove as insulation against the cold metal. The broken handrail and rusted screws remain undisturbed. The door was never pried open successfully. Han Zhao's message still lingered visible on the corner of his vision. Chun Jin typed out a reply at last. Chun Jin, how were you aware someone was knocking at my carriage door? Han Zhao did not reply instantly. Flames inside the north gate stove suddenly sputtered out. Through the veil of blowing snow, Su Zhao watched a figure dart out from beneath the canvas shelter to wave urgently toward the grain depot. Moments later, a public channel notification popped up. 6501. The wounded man taken away by the gray-hatted stranger has gone missing. Has anyone spotted the gray-hatted man? Shortly after this alert appeared, Han Zhao's response arrived. Han Zhao, I do not know. Chun Jin stared at that curt denial before turning his gaze back toward the north gate shelter. Survivors were frantically searching for the gray-hatted man and his missing casualty. Yet Han Zhao had known in advance about the messenger impersonating Northgate staff at his door. These two simultaneous developments could hardly be written off as mere coincidence. Su Zhao set down the binoculars and asked in a low voice, should we still head to the North Gate? Not for the time being. Chun Jin secured the glove and ticket fragment inside the plastic bag before tucking the package against his chest. The gray-hatted man is missing, and chaos has broken out among the shelter occupants. Showing up now would only broadcast our desperation for answers. After stowing the plastic bag against his torso, he leaned down to inspect the rusted screw embedded within the door track. Protruding beside the screw lay a severed length of gray thread. The thread lay submerged in melted snow water along the door track, its color dulled by moisture. Chun Jin resisted the urge to pull it free immediately and surveyed every item lining the doorway first. The red scarf remained wedged in the crack. The broken handrail had not shifted position, and the seat leg was still braced firmly against the door's lower frame. The carriage door had not been breached, yet this thread could not have drifted here naturally on the wind. One end of the thread was tied into a tiny tight knot wrapped around the screw shaft. The other end snapped cleanly outside the door track. Its broken tip, smudged with cold dust and traces of melted snow. Someone had crouched beside the door and attempted to fish the screw loose using this thread, failing to extract whatever they sought to retrieve. Do not touch it. Su Zhao halted him from 2 paces away, binoculars slung around his neck. The thread fibers could carry unknown contaminants. Leaving it lodged here creates a permanent vulnerability along the door frame. Chun Jin pulled on his torn glove and teased the thread loose gently using the sharpened edge of his hardened claw. The screw clicked faintly as the thread came free, prompting Chun Jin to freeze and listen for external movement before placing the thread segment on the carriage seat. He laid the discarded thread next to the torn glove removed earlier from its thumb cavity. While the color matched closely, the thickness and texture differed subtly. The stitching pulled from the glove was soft and frayed after prolonged water saturation, whereas the thread recovered from the door track was tightly twisted, likely plucked from the hem of clothing or a fabric sack. Su Zhao studied the 2 threads side by side for a long moment. They look similar, but we cannot confirm they originate from the same source. Understood. Chun Jin captured an image of the 2 thread samples within his visual interface and sent it to 0792. Chun Jin, have you seen this thread before? 0792 did not reply immediately. He minimized the private message panel to refasten the loose screw along the door track. The messenger had resorted to deception to lure them outside after failing to force entry, but they would likely adopt more direct methods on their next attempt. Every defensive fixture along the doorway needed to remain fully intact, as even minor damage could create an exploitable opening for intruders. As Chun Jin double-checked the door's stability repeatedly, Su Zhao voiced a thought. The gray-hatted man and his wounded companion have vanished, while this messenger knows you visited the abandoned tracks. Could the North Gate have an informant monitoring our movements? It is a possibility. Chun Jin clipped his small hammer back onto his waist belt. Alternatively, a separate group could be surveilling the North Gate crowd and targeting us amid the resulting confusion. The 2 scenarios sounded nearly identical on the surface, yet carried critical distinctions. The first implied Han Zhao's group had leaked information about them, while the second meant unknown actors were hiding within the busy North Gate shelter to operate unseen. With no concrete evidence to confirm either theory, directly questioning Han Zhao would mean exposing the glove, ticket fragment, and mystery thread to outside eyes. Still, leaving the wound untreated was not viable long-term. Chun Jin rolled up his trouser leg to examine the injury. The wound edges had whitened from constant blood saturation. The dull ache was manageable while seated inside the carriage. Yet standing reopened the torn flesh to fresh bleeding that simple tissue could no longer stem effectively. Su Zhao knelt to inspect the laceration and dropped the suggestion of immediate sutures, instead moving the camera bag aside to clear a spare seat. 4410 is still working out of the shelter, he said. Go seek her treatment. Leave these sensitive items here under my watch. Can you secure the carriage alone? I cannot guarantee absolute safety, but I cannot leave the carriage unattended with the binoculars while you go get stitched up. Su Zhao lifted his gaze toward the frosted window panes. I will hold down this location and keep watch for anyone approaching the carriage doors. While you are at the shelter getting treated, ask for a physical description of the wounded man taken by the gray-hatted stranger. The plan was settled. Chun Jin would receive medical care at the shelter while Su Zhao guarded the carriage, with the glove and ticket fragment secured safely indoors. If hostile parties were watching the shelter grounds, they would not gain simultaneous access to both the people and the critical evidence. Chun Jin tucked the gray thread, old glove, and ticket fragment deep inside his travel bag, weighing a packet of leftover broken biscuits over the bag opening as a crude decoy. Anyone rummaging through the bag would first encounter the biscuit package and adhesive glue, unlikely to notice the sealed plastic pouch buried beneath them right away. He composed a new message for 4410. Chun Jin, I will trade half a bottle of adhesive glue for wound suturing services. Are you available right now? 4410 replied without delay. 4410, I can help you. Come alone, and do not follow any escorts sent by others. A follow-up line appeared seconds later. 4410, the survivor taken by the gray-hatted man wears a gray cotton jacket with an injured left shoulder and a black glove on his right hand. Do not trust anyone referencing his identity to gain your confidence. Chun Jin focused on the detail of the black right glove before glancing up at Su Zhao, who had also read the message and swept the surrounding Northgate shelter area with his binoculars. The messenger kept both hands tucked inside his sleeve cuffs during his visit, hiding them from view. Su Zhao recounted. I caught a quick glimpse of his right hand as he walked away. He wore no black glove whatsoever. This confirmed another lie in the messenger's fabricated story. Instead of sending an immediate reply to confirm his arrival, Chun Jin had Su Zhao scan the northern snowfield twice through the window to confirm no fresh dragging trails stretched between the carriage and the shelter tracks. Only then did he crack the carriage door open by a narrow gap. I am heading over. Do not unlock this door for anyone under any circumstances until I return. Su Zhao nodded and retrieved a strip of red adhesive tape from his camera bag, sticking it to the inner corner of the window frame beside the latch. What purpose does that serve? I misread the window curtain movement earlier, Su Zhao explained. This tape will tear if anyone tampers with the window lock or shifts the frame, leaving clear physical evidence of tampering. Chun Jin acknowledged the precaution with a solemn expression. Su Zhao's practical safeguards were far more reliable than empty promises to stay vigilant. This frozen wasteland punished every moment of complacency. Overlooked small details would escalate into fatal crises with no clear trail back to where security had first lapsed. He reinserted the red scarf into the door crack, reset the jammed handrail, and braced the seat leg against the door frame once more before walking alongside the exterior of the train cars toward the north gate. Snowfall had weakened since morning, yet the wind cut far sharper. Each gust stung the open wound through his trousers as if shards of ice were being pressed into the raw flesh. Every carriage along the northern stretch remained sealed tight, faint silhouettes stirring behind frosted window glass only to recoil the instant he drew near. The area outside the shelter was far quieter than before. The metal stove burned behind a canvas barrier, casting a warm orange glow across the snow surface. 3 wounded survivors sat propped against wooden crates. One with a makeshift cloth bandage wrapped around his arm, another with blood soaking his shoe uppers, and a third hunched deep inside his scarf with violent, racking coughs shaking his shoulders. 4410 knelt beside the stove, sterilizing a needle over the open flame with gauze, suture thread, and a chipped enamel mug for melting snow laid out beside her. She looked up upon seeing Chun Jin, first checking his injured leg then his empty hands. Where's the glue? Chun Jin handed over the half-empty glue bottle, its plastic casing stiffened by freezing temperatures with only a small quantity of adhesive remaining inside. 4410 twisted open the cap to sniff the contents before stowing the bottle safely inside her medical kit, spreading a cleaner piece of burlap cloth across a wooden crate surface. Sit down. Cut your trouser leg open rather than tearing the fabric forcefully. The crate edge dug uncomfortably into Chun Jin's thigh as he seated himself. He passed his pocket blade to 4410, who first flushed dried blood from the wound using melted snow water before dabbing the raw flesh with an alcohol pad. The alcohol searing the exposed tissue made the veins on the back of Chun Jin's hand bulge tautly as he gripped the crate edge hard enough to splinter the wood, not uttering a single sound of pain. Bear with the discomfort, 4410 warned him. This laceration has been left untreated far too long. The surrounding tissue has softened from prolonged blood exposure. Suturing will not guarantee rapid healing, yet neglecting the wound will only worsen the damage progressively. I understand. She wasted no further words, threading the needle through one side of the laceration and pulling the suture taut. Cold sweat soaked Chun Jin's back despite the stove's nearby warmth, the thin thread dragging against damaged tissue producing a faint scraping sound with every stitch. With Su Zhao absent to distract him from the pain, Chun Jin fixed his gaze on the snow drifting diagonally past the shelter exterior. As he counted the fourth stitch being placed, he broke the silence to ask, what name did the wounded man taken by the gray-hatted man go by? 4410 kept her hands busy. He never mentioned any number. A metal sheet sliced open his shoulder. He said there was medicine at the grain depot and wanted Gray Cap to take him there. Gray Cap was reluctant at first, until the man pulled out half a lump of coal. Did he say anything about the abandoned north side rails? Nothing. 4410 snipped a thread and looked up at him. Why do you ask? Someone used your name to lure me outside. 4410's expression shifted. She tossed the used alcohol pad into an iron canister. Flames licked the cotton, curling its edges black. I never sent anyone for you, she said. That wounded man did ask where your carriage was before he left. I did not tell him. Han Shao has plenty of men. It would not surprise me if someone knew about the heated carriage on the north side. But knowing it is you, and exactly what lies to use to get you to open your door, that is more than a random sighting. Chun Jin did not respond. He rolled his trouser leg back down. Fresh gauze and stitches held his wound closed. It still hurt badly, yet blood no longer streamed down his leg the moment he stood. 4410 picked up glue and squeezed a little onto a split wooden plank. The plank had been used to splint the wounded man's forearm, and its edges had worked loose. She pressed the crack shut, then bound it tight with cloth strips. Dried blood coated her fingers. Who wrapped the white cloth around Gray Cap's wrist? Chun Jin asked. Himself. 4410 frowned. He scraped his wrist when he first came into town. The cloth was torn from the awning. The gray thread tying it came from an old cotton, padded jacket. What is on your mind? Chun Jin glanced toward the pile of cut-off scraps at her feet. Gray, black and red rags, threads stripped from old garments. That thread found in the door track was nothing special. It only proved someone had touched the carriage door. It gave no proof of who, still less that 0792 was nearby. He left the gray thread where it lay. Just curious. 4410 shot him a look, but pressed no further. She closed her sewing kit and pointed past the awning. Do not take the middle path going back. The ground caved in there recently. Stick alongside the third carriage. The snow is firmer. And if that wounded man comes back, check his right hand first. His black glove is missing half its fingertips, and there is a burn scar across the back of his hand. Chun Jin committed the warning to memory. Everyone at Northgate carried their own ledger. 4410 traded stitches for coal and passage home. The wounded man offered half a lump of coal to persuade Gray Cap to guide him. Gray Cap changed his route only after accepting the coal. No favor was given for free. Even so, one man had vanished. As he stood, gauze pulled tight against his calf. 4410 pulled a thin length of thread from her tool kit and held it out. Keep this wound dry for 7 days. If the stitches come loose, come back. Bring something to trade. Do not show up empty-handed. Do you have enough glue left? Enough for now. 4410 pulled her gloves back on. Bring something else next time. Chun Jin nodded and turned toward the carriage. Barely clear of the awning, a new message popped up on his channel. 6501. Stay away from the grain depot. I cannot find Gray Cap. That wounded man came out from behind the grain depot. I could not make out his face. No explanation followed, only a heavily shaken photograph. A metal pole jutted out of snow-covered tracks. A strip of white cloth was tied around its top, with half loose gray thread fluttering in the wind beneath it. The channel fell silent for 2 heartbeats after 6501's photo appeared. Then replies poured in. 6088. Isn't that Gray Cap's pole? 0719. Where is he? 6501. I have not seen him. The photo was tilted. Snow, fog blurred the old rails and low walls into one pale wash of gray and white. Only the pole stuck out beside the track, wrapped with white cloth and trailing loose gray thread. Chun Jin zoomed in. The lopsided weld beneath the pole's grip came into view, rough, unfinished slag sticking out. It was definitely Gray, Cap's pole. Su Zhao stood by the window, telescope still pressed to his eyes. This photo was taken from the old Wei house. You can see the tracks behind the grain depot from there, though the back gate is hidden behind a low wall. Did 6501 tell you that? He asked me this morning whether anyone could hide west of the Wei house. Su Zhao shifted his telescope northward. I said yes, provided he did not go deep inside. Part of the roof caved in there. Any loud noise will draw every nearby threat. Chen Jin did not forward the photo to Han Xiao right away. He messaged 6501 directly. Chen Jin, there is a lopsided weld below the pole's grip? Chen Jin, was the pole already lying there before you took the picture? He propped his left leg on the opposite seat. Fresh stitches pulled at his flesh. Even lifting his toes sent throbbing pain through him. The carriage was warm, and warmth made him acutely aware of his injury. Numb from cold had dulled pain. Once warmth returned, his body catalogued every hurt. 6501 replied quickly. 6501, yes. The weld looks like a rough lump. 6501, before I entered the Wei house, it was lying in the snow without any cloth tied to it. Then someone came out from behind the grain depot and squatted beside the pole for a long time. He wore a half-fingered black glove on his right hand. Chen Jin stared at the second reply. Gray Cap's pole. The wounded man's black glove. That gray thread from the door track. All assembled neatly inside one photograph. Everything lined up too perfectly. It was not the kind of scene left behind by someone fleeing for their life. A man with a wounded shoulder and a burned hand escaping from behind the grain depot would prioritize shelter from the snow, medicine, and escape routes. He would not stop to plant a pole upright and carefully tie a strip of white cloth around its top. 4410 said the wounded man wears a half-fingered black glove on his right hand, Su Zhao said. He came back. Coming back and arranging that pole, there are two separate things. Chen Jin set his phone down on the seat. 6501 only saw a man squatting beside the pole. He did not watch him push Gray Cap inside the grain depot. Su Zhao glanced over. You think someone staged this for us to find? I think someone does not mind us seeing it. The channel erupted. Han Xiao sent 2 messages. All guiding operations at Northgate were suspended. Everyone returning from near the grain depot was ordered to wait outside the awning for screening. People immediately complained about coal being confiscated. Some asked what they should do with coal they had already collected. Others began speculating whether Gray Cap was dead. Han Xiao gave one single reply. Han Xiao, register all coal first. No one returns to their carriage until we know what happened. Once he seals off Northgate, everyone carrying coal has no choice but obey, Su Zhao remarked. If he does not seal it off, people will keep rushing toward the grain depot. More than Gray Cap will die. Chen Jin slipped his hard claw tool into his side pocket and clipped a small hammer to his waist. These routes are under his oversight, and one of his guides is missing. If he does not get this under control, no one will follow his orders anymore. Su Zhao offered no argument. He unfolded an old flyer. Its reverse side held a rough sketch of Northgate and the old Wei house. He added 2 marks showing patches of darkened snow. Gray Cap led people alongside the third carriage. No one stepped on these 2 spots this morning, and nobody has stepped there since. Keep clear of them if you go. I will not go inside the grain depot, Chen Jin said. The awning, then? I'm going to talk to Han Xiao. I want to know exactly how much that man in the photograph is worth, half a lump of coal. Su Zhao lifted his head, clearly about to warn him his leg had only just been stitched. In the end, he simply folded the flyer and handed it over. I will keep watch over the carriage. If anyone knocks, I will first check the tape along the window frame. Chen Jin had barely reached the carriage door when a private message lit up his screen. Han Xiao, I have seen 6501's photo. Han Xiao, you know about the black glove and white cloth. Come to the awning and identify the evidence. Chen Jin replied at once. Chen Jin, I will only examine the pole and traces outside the grain depot. I will not open the back gate, nor will I step inside the building. One of your men escorts me there and back. I receive half a carriage, heating coal brick upon my return. Han Xiao made no attempt to haggle. Han Xiao agreed. Han Xiao, cross that back threshold, and this deal is void. His terms were far clearer than empty spoken promises. Chen Jin put his phone away, loosened his scarf, pulled a rusted screw free from the door track, and slipped sideways out of the carriage. Once steady on his feet, he pulled his scarf back tight and signaled for Su Zhao to brace the broken handrail and seat leg from inside. Chaos swirled outside the Northgate awning. 2 men carrying coal blocked the canvas edge. One man in a gray cotton, padded jacket clutched 3 coal bricks to his chest, sweat beading on his forehead despite falling snow. Behind him stood a young man huddled against the cold, holding only half a lump of coal. He kept repeating himself to the guards. My carriage is just north. I can get there in 5 minutes. Why am I not allowed to leave? 5 minutes traveling empty-handed, the guard answered. What if you run into trouble hauling coal? This is my coal. The man in gray finally snapped. I carried it out of the storage vault myself. Han Xiao sat on a wooden crate registering names. He looked up at the outburst. You carried it out, but who decides whether it burns in your carriage is not you. You are free to walk away right now. Leave the coal, and you may collect it later. Why? Because you traveled with Gray Cap earlier. Han Xiao set down his pen, and he has not come back. The man's face flushed bright red. He tried to pull the coal tighter to his chest. The guard did not snatch it away, but laid a metal pole across the tracks. A stand off followed. In the end, the man dared not step past the barrier. He stood in the wind holding his coal as though clutching bricks pulled hot from someone else's hearth. In the end, the man dared not step past the barrier. He stood in the wind holding his coal as though clutching bricks pulled hot from someone else's hearth. Shen Jin watched for a while before walking toward Han Xiao. Han Xiao handed him a newer version of 6501's photograph, taken from closer range. A figure squatted with its back toward the camera beside the pole. Its right hand was visible, covered by a glove missing half its fingertips, a charred burn mark prominent across the back. The left shoulder of its jacket caved inward, as though padded over an injury. Zhou Tsun stood nearby, a strip of white cloth wrapped around his left thumb. His complexion was paler than snow. That is the wounded man. Gray Cap took him for medicine, and he left Gray Cap's pole planted in the snow before running off. Did you see him run? Shen Jin asked. Zhou Tsun fell silent. You only saw a photograph. Shen Jin handed the phone back to Han Xiao. The right hand and left shoulder injury matched the wounded man's description. The pole is his. The photograph proves nothing beyond that. 4410 had just finished replacing bandages for the wounded man. Hearing mention of white cloth, she glanced toward the phone. She did not touch it, but spoke across the crate. What color cloth is tied around the pole? White, Zhou Tsun answered. Gray thread sticks out underneath. There is plenty of white cloth here at the awning. 4410 rummaged through the scraps by her feet and pulled out a frayed strip of gauze. We use cloth like this for wound compresses, wrapping thumbs, patching shoe soles. The gray threads come stripped from old cotton, padded coats. Do not jump to conclusions just because two similar objects appear together. Zhou Tsun's jaw tightened. Then that cloth on the pole could have been tied there by Gray Cap himself. It is possible. 4410 stuffed the gauze back into her bag. Or it could have been taken from here by someone else. If you intend to investigate, look for coal dust, frost deposits, and glove residues. Do not expect scraps of thread to speak for themselves. Her tone was blunt, yet she held out thin plastic bags to Ollie. Separate the gloves and cloth scraps. Do not store them alongside coal or medical supplies. Ollie accepted the bags and tucked them deep inside a coal sack. Shen Jin glanced at 4,410's jumbled pile of fabric scraps. The urge to directly link that gray thread to 0792 faded away. Thread was only thread, torn from an old coat. Identifying a person purely from scrap thread was no different from naming a suspect only from a single shoe print. Han Xiao tapped the wooden crate. 6501 is still inside the Wei house. Is he able to move? Shen Jin asked. I told him to stay put. Han Xiao said. He reported hearing noise from behind the back gate right after taking his first photo and dared not draw near. Fresh, undisturbed snow surrounds the Wei house. If too many of us trample over there, whatever traces remain in the photograph will be lost. What about 6501 while we are gone? Zhou Tsun frowned. He is not one of your people? No, Han Xiao looked at him. So do not make promises on his behalf. Shen Jin will examine the outer side of the back gate. Zhou Tsun and Ollie will guide him. 6501 stays hidden. We will call him out only once we know what we are dealing with. Zhou Tsun looked as if he wanted to object, but held his tongue. He was not unwilling to retrieve 6501, yet every choice at Northgate carried trade-offs. If they rescued 6501 first, snow would bury the pole and glove behind the grain depot. If they investigated the back gate first, the witness trapped in the Wei house remained exposed to danger. Neither option came without risk. Han Xiao did not press for theories. He set his phone face down on the crate and pointed toward the grain depot's eastern side. Investigate only the outside. Zhou Tsun leads, Ollie follows. Collect the pole, glove, and cloth if you can. Do not open that back gate. A short-haired woman stepped out from behind the stove. She carried an empty coal sack slung over her shoulder, a short axe tucked at her waist. Her name was Ollie. An old scar crusted with frost ran across her cheek. She first glanced at Chen Jin's injured leg, then at Jotsun. One of us cannot walk fast, and the other tends to act impulsively. Who will touch the pole first when we arrive? Jotsun said flatly, I will. Then you bring up the rear. Ollie pushed the empty sack into his arms. Place everything you find inside the sack. Nothing goes into your pockets. If you carry back something dangerous from behind that gate, Han will not take it, and I will not clean up after you. Jotsun said nothing more. He picked up a metal pole and stepped forward. Chen Jin walked in the middle. Ollie brought up the rear. As they rounded alongside the third carriage, Jotsun raised a hand signaling them all to stop. A patch of darkened snow lay ahead, exactly where Su Zhao had marked with a cross. Ollie picked up a broken brick from beside the wall and tossed it onto the snow. The snow layer sank with a dull hollow thud. Cracked spider, webbed outward through coal, stained ice. Jotsun stared at the fissure. Could the telescope pick that pit out? It could not see the pit itself. Chen Jin walked around it. It only showed nobody had stepped there since morning. They continued east alongside the third carriage. Walls of the grain depot slowly materialized through swirling snow fog. No voices came from behind them. Only an iron gate rattled faintly in the wind. Jotsun tightened his grip on his pole. Ollie's hand rested half, drawn on her waist, axe. Chen Jin felt for the flyer in his pocket. Its corners had gone soft with sweat. The pole still stood there. Gray, Cap, and the wounded man were nowhere to be seen. Cole remained firmly in people's arms, yet the path forward had broken. Someone had left objects lying in the snow, deliberately waiting for them to reach that gate. Snow was thinner along the grain depot's eastern outer wall, mixed with coal cinders. Their footsteps crunched crisply. Jotsun walked ahead. Every time his pole tapped the ground, he paused, listening for threats before taking another step. Chen Jin followed behind him. He kept his left stride short. Gauze rubbed against his wound. After dozens of steps, warmth seeped through his trouser leg. Ollie walked slightly behind Chen Jin, empty coal sack slung over her shoulder, short, axe at her waist. Passing two low shacks, she gestured for them to keep clear of the walls. Wind billowed window, paper inward, then sucked it flat again. No sound of people came from inside, only soft thuds against wood. Chen Jin avoided glancing toward the windows. The notice on the sign, board, do not respond, was not written for idle curiosity. Their objective was the pole, not searching every shack for hidden presences. Messages trickled in from Su Zhao. Su Zhao, 2 sets of fresh footprints by the east corner. One leads toward the rear of the grain depot. One runs north along the wall. Su Zhao, no one behind the overturned truck. Chen Jin messaged back, keep watch over the carriage. From far away, Su Zhao could spot silhouettes and paths, yet he could not see sunken pits hidden under snow or tell whether footprints had been altered by wind. Chen Jin stored the information away and did not alter their route based purely on those lines. Jotsun noticed him typing. He halted beside a fallen wooden pole. What does the man in the carriage say? 2 sets of footprints by the east corner. Chen Jin looked up. One toward the back gate, one north along the wall. Does the north-bound trail lead to the Old Way house? I cannot tell. Jotsun's jaw tightened. He hated that answer, yet he prodded the northern snow with his metal pole. Beneath the surface, a black, frozen rat darted out and scurried into a crack between bricks. Ollie stepped sideways to block its path without crushing it and jammed the wooden pole into the crevice. Focus on the back gate first, she said. Human footprints can stay visible until nightfall. Snow and wind will bury the glove and pole before long. The grain depot back gate was concealed behind stacked broken crates. Its upper iron surface was stained black with coal soot. Thick frost crusted along its lower half. The pole from the photograph stood right outside. Up close they saw its shaft threaded through an iron ring fixed to the gate, its far end braced against a concrete block beside the track. Someone had used Gray Cap's pole to lock the gate from the outside. Jotsun squatted beside the pole without touching it. He looked toward Chen Jin. This is the one. Chen Jin stopped 2 steps away, bracing one knee to ease the throbbing in his leg. Beneath the pole's grip sat that dark, uneven weld, rough slag still sticking along its edges. He remembered Gray. Cap always avoided gripping that spot when he used the pole to probe snow. It is his, he confirmed. But we cannot tell from that weld alone who jammed it into the iron ring. Ollie peered through the gate gap. Mel and refrozen snow crammed around the outer side of the iron ring. Half a black glove lay buried inside it, a right hand glove. A burn scar showed clearly across its back. Only 2, and half fingers remained. Its edges were coated with coal dust and dried blood. Jotsun swore under his breath. The wounded man's glove. Chen Jin did not reach down to pick it up at once. He studied footprints in front of the gate. One trail dragged heavily. toes pointing inward toward the gate, likely left by the wounded man. The second set sank deep, heels angled outward, matching the tread pattern of Gray Cap's thick-soled boots. The two trails tangled together right before the gate. Coal cinders had been trampled everywhere. It was impossible to tell who had arrived first or who had left last. A dull thud echoed from inside the gate. The iron door shuddered, and the pole rattled against its iron ring. Jotun gripped his own pole tighter. Ollie half drew her short axe. Shinjin stayed still, staring at the layer of blackened frost sealing the bottom gap. After a pause, a voice called out from within, hoarse, as though filled with cold dust. Who is out there? The voice fell silent briefly, then called again. Medicine is in here. Open this gate quickly. Jotun took half a step forward. Shinjin held him back. Do not answer. What if that is Gray Cap? Jotun kept his eyes fixed on the crack. That is his pole out there, and that glove belongs to the wounded man. That pole is locking the gate from outside. Shinjin said. Pull it free, and whatever is inside comes out. Gray Cap, the wounded man, or something else. How will you know what you are facing? Jotun said nothing. Something crashed against the gate again. Frost flakes fell from its bottom edge, opening a thin slit. A white medicine pack was pushed out through the gap. Its plastic casing scraped across coal cinders and came to rest beside the pole. The seal remained unbroken. Inside could be seen 2 hemostatic dressings and a small roll of sterile suture thread. Take the medicine, the voice from inside said. Take it, and open the gate. Ollie glanced toward the pack. Without asking who spoke behind the door, she turned to Shinjin. Can we drag it out? Shinjin pulled out his hard claw tool. He dropped lower and hooked the claw tip onto the medicine pack's edge and pulled it outward. Bending his left knee pulled sharply at his fresh stitches. He avoided putting weight onto that leg, bracing his right knee against frozen coal, cinders, and slowly dragged the medicine pack clear of the threshold. Shinjin did not linger beside the gate gap. He dragged the pack behind crates and motioned for Ollie to pick it up wrapped inside the coal sack. He noticed other objects half buried in the snow and cinders beside the gate, yet he made no move to dig them out. The moment the medicine pack moved away from the slit, banging against the gate, turned frantic. Don't take it. Do not leave. The words rushed out too fast. Their intonation flattened, like phrases hastily assembled from things the speaker had overheard. Shinjin did not look back and handed the pack over to Ollie. Check the seal. Do not open it here. A bluish, tinged finger poked out through the gate slit, its fingernails packed full of black soot. The hand reached for the pole and groped its way upward along the shaft. The iron gate shook under repeated impacts. Jotun paled and stepped backward, yet he kept his own pole held ready, making no attempt to remove the pole locking the gate. Shinjin struck a metal storage box sharply with his small hammer. The sharp crack echoed. The hand vanished instantly behind the gate. A crash followed as wooden shelves toppled over inside. Leave, he ordered. Then the voice behind the gate called out once more. Hey, Cian. Jotun froze completely. The tip of his metal pole stabbed deep into snow. The speaker behind the gate did not shout for them to open up. Only a quiet cough followed, as though choking on cold dust. Ollie's hand landed lightly on Jotun's arm, not pulling him away, but her voice was low and urgent. Do not turn around. Jotun's Adam's apple bobbed. Gray Cap always called me that. Shinjin stared toward the gate. The voice sounded exactly like Gray Cap. The pole outside belonged to Gray Cap as well. Yet that very pole locked the gate from outside. And that bluish, colored hand visible through the slit was not the color of living flesh. If he really is trapped inside, opening this gate right now will not save him, Shinjin said. We move away first. Jotun said nothing. Ollie pulled his pole free from snow and stepped backward. That movement jolted Jotun back to his senses, and he followed around the crates. More heavy impacts shook the metal gate, yet the voice did not call his name again. As Jotun caught up, his right knuckles were bone white. Gray Cap had once dragged him out of a snow-filled pit, and that utterance, son, had sounded so authentic. Shinjin did not hurry him, slowing his own pace just a little to let Jotun keep up. After walking several dozen steps, a new message popped up from Su Zhao. Su Zhao, at the back gate of the grain depot. Something reached out through the door. Have you gotten out yet? Shinjin replied. We're out. Separated by 2 rows of low-rise houses, the green rail carriage to the north was nothing but a blurry pool of yellow light. He closed the message interface and said nothing to Su Zhao about the voice calling, son, from behind the door. At such a distance, even if Su Zhao had heard it, he would only have had one more thing to worry about. Jotun did not speak until he reached the corner of the eastern wall. What if the gray hat is still inside? Whether he's still there tomorrow will have to wait until we can confirm from outside. Chen Jin's leg throbbed sharply, yet he kept walking. If the person behind that door really had been Gray Hat, the first thing he would have asked is who had locked the door. He would not have immediately told you to fetch medicine and open the gate. Jotson shifted the steel pipe to his left hand and wiped his right palm across his cotton-padded jacket. He offered no further counter-argument. He did not say he believed Chen Jin, but neither did he glance back. Beyond the rain awning, chaos had grown worse. Having heard what had happened at the grain depot's back gate, some people clung tightly to their coal bricks. Others tried to circle north toward the carriages, only to be stopped by the guards. Han Xiao stood beside the stove. He waited until Jotson had laid down the steel pipe, black gloves and medicine pack on a wooden crate before letting 4410 step forward. 4410 did not open the medicine pack. Using tweezers, she flipped the plastic bag over to check that its seal remained intact, then held its outer casing close to the fire to dry. She placed the black gloves alone onto an empty iron tray, keeping everyone away from them. The hemostatic dressings and sutures are still properly sealed, she said. Wipe down the outer layer. Do not touch it directly. Only then did Han Xiao turn toward Chen Jin. That steel pipe belonged to Gray Hat. Those black gloves came from an injured person. Something behind the door can talk. You did not open it. We didn't. Standing beside the crate, Jotson suddenly spoke. 6501 is still in the Wei house. Han Xiao looked over at him. Chen Jin said we would go back for him. Jotson ground out between his teeth. Should we go now? Han Xiao did not give an immediate answer. He glanced first at the sky, then at Chen Jin. Access through the north gate had already been shut down by his men. Outside the awning, people still stood clutching coal. Behind the grain depot's back gate lurked something capable of mimicking Gray Hat's voice. Sending yet another team to the ruined Wei house would mean splitting their already thin manpower even further. Jotson and Ali will go, Han Xiao finally decided. Only as far as the outside of the Wei house. If 6501 can get out on his own, bring him back. Do not enter the collapsed walls under any circumstances. Jotson's jaw tightened, ready to protest, but Ali thrust a coal sack into his hands first. If you want to hunt for Gray Hat, we still need to bring back the photographer first. Let's go. They carried no coal and did not pause to warm their hands over the stove before heading toward the derelict Wei house. Chen Jin watched their figures vanish into the snow. He said nothing like, stay safe. Phrases such as that felt far too cheap here. No well-wished sentence could undo a single misstep. Han Xiao nodded and swept his gaze over the crowd beneath the awning. The eastern gate of the grain depot stays sealed. No more personnel will be led inside through the north gate today. Anyone who has obtained coal must register it under the awning first. My men will escort groups back in batches. Those who wish to make their own way may do so, but do not come crying to us if something goes wrong. A man holding coal bricks opened his mouth, saw the smudged black ash on Jotson's jacket, and swallowed his complaint. Han Xiao gave no timeline for resuming guided trips, merely separating those who could leave from those who could not. Several in the crowd looked grim, yet nobody could propose a safer alternative. Beneath the awning, someone hugged their coal bricks tighter and muttered angrily. How long are we supposed to wait? Beside them, a woman clutching an empty coal sack spoke even more quietly. We wait until something dares to step out of that door. No one responded. The enamel kettle on the stove came to a boil. Steam lifted its lid, producing a sharp clanging sound. 4410 pressed the lid back down and continued wiping the medicine pack casing with tweezers, as though oblivious to all the complaints. The guards by the north gate ignored the unrest and turned the registration log to a fresh page. Chen Jin stood beside the stove. Heat from the fire made the bandage on his leg throb more painfully. Gray Hat was missing. The grain depot back gate remained locked, and Han Xiao had recalled all north gate staff to the awning. People stood outside the canvas tarp, neither leaving nor setting down their coal. Jotson walked over and set half a coal brick down beside Chen Jin. Han gave this to you. The brick was only palm-sized, one corner chipped away, yet surprisingly heavy. Chen Jin took it without thanks. They had returned from the back gate carrying only a medicine pack and a tangled new set of problems. The coal was payment for what they had done, not a reward for good-hearted behavior. Using tweezers, 4410 pulled one hemostatic dressing from the pack and placed it inside a clean paper bag. Your leg was just stitched. Keep this one for yourself. The rest stays here. We have multiple wounded today. One is enough, Chen Jin said. 4410 offered neither praise nor persuasion. She turned away to re-bandage a man with an injured arm. Firelight fell across her bowed head. Outside the awning, people began calling out coal brick identification numbers. Carrying the half, brick and paper bag, Chun-Jin headed back to the carriage. Jotun accompanied him as far as the outer side of carriage 3. He asked nothing about fuel supplies inside and never peered through the cracks in the door. Once safely inside, Chun-Jin repositioned the red scarf before handing the coal brick over to Su Zhao. Su Zhao hefted the brick briefly before setting it beside the fuel compartment under the seat, instead of placing it straight inside. We will add it later. The fire is still steady. Prop your leg up and do not tear your fresh stitches. Chun-Jin glanced at him. Su Zhao pushed old tickets in the plastic bag holding gloves and ticket fragments aside on the seat, clearing space for his injured leg. Chun-Jin stowed the hemostatic dressing in his travel bag. He had not brought the full medicine pack back. It remained under the awning for 4410 to fully sanitize its outer surface. Su Zhao did not reply at once. His gaze traveled past Chun-Jin's shoulder toward the disused northern tracks. There was someone on the low slope a moment ago. Who? I could not make out their face. They stood almost exactly where 0792 had stood when he took that photo of the red scarf. Su Zhao held out the binoculars. They never approached the carriage. They pressed a piece of paper into the snow and walked away along the old tracks. Chun-Jin took the binoculars. The slope stood empty. Only a shallow depression marked the spot, holding a sheet of paper whose edges curled in the wind. The intruder had departed at a leisurely pace, yet wind was already erasing their footprints. By the time they reached the spot, there might well be nothing left. A private message notification flickered at the edge of Chun-Jin's field of view. 0792 had finally replied regarding the photograph of the gray thread. 0792, I have seen thread like this before. 0792, my father's gray cotton jacket was mended along the hem with exactly this thread. 0792 sent no further messages. Chun-Jin scrolled back to the photo. The thread caught in the door track was tightly twisted. Thread inside the old glove was frayed from soaking. The piece wrapped around the steel pipe was smudged with coal dust. While the color matched, there were many possible sources. Thread identical to this could have been pulled from the hem of 0792's father's jacket, or scavenged from any number of worn jackets under the awning. No photograph alone could prove where exactly it had originated. Su Zhao sat by the window, the half-coal brick resting beside the fuel compartment. He stared at the snow, trapped paper whose corners flapped whenever gusts blew across the snow. We should go get it now, he said. Wait until Jotun comes back. Chun-Jin set down his phone. Men are still at the way, house, and trouble lingers at the grain depot back gate. If both of us leave the carriage unattended, someone could remove the red scarf. Retrieving the note would be pointless if we have nowhere safe to examine it. If we wait much longer, wind will blow the paper away. Melting snow will wash away all writing. Su Zhao turned toward him. Then we will learn absolutely nothing. Chun-Jin held his phone in his palm, his thumb brushing its edge, and stayed silent. Su Zhao set the binoculars on the seat and reached for his camera bag. It was only when his fingers touched the door latch that Chun-Jin spoke. You intend to go alone? The slope is less than 100 meters from the carriage. I will fetch it, and you stay here to guard the door. You do not know that stretch of ground. Neither do you. Su Zhao met his eyes. Back at the grain depot gate, you told Jotun to step back, and both Jotun and I obeyed. Now I am telling you we need to retrieve that note right away. Trust my judgment this time. His tone was calm and free of anger, yet Chun-Jin could hear lingering echoes of the card incident. Su Zhao was not rehashing old arguments to blame him. He simply refused to let Chun-Jin bear every uncertain decision alone. Chun-Jin pulled a small hammer from his waist and slipped it into the side pocket of the camera bag. We go together. Lock the door securely, and do not add coal to the fire. Su Zhao showed no visible relief. He pushed the red scarf firmly back into the door gap. Outside, Chun-Jin wedged the broken handrail and seat leg to block the door and jammed rusted screws beneath the scarf's lower edge. As he closed the door, Su Zhao steadied it from inside, keeping weight off Chun-Jin's injured leg. Before leaving, Su Zhao stuck a small strip of red tape beneath the door handle. Chun-Jin noticed. What is this new marker? If the tape is gone when we return, do not open the door. You are covering this carriage in tags like a broken storage shelf. Treat it as inventory security. If something has been tampered with, we check first. Su Zhao slung binoculars over his shoulders. When goods go missing, you audit the books. Chun-Jin gave him a look but offered no rebuttal. Su Zhao had learned sharp, practical tricks, exactly the kind they needed. For now, that was reassuring. The slope itself was low, yet snow lay deeper there than beside the tracks. Su Zhao walked ahead. Instead of grabbing the note straight away, he lifted the binoculars to scan the slope's rear. Behind it lay tilted disused rails and an overturned coal cart filled with snow. No figures were visible. Shinjin followed slightly to his left rear. Before putting weight on each step, he probed the snow ahead with the hammer's handle. Every step tugged at his leg wound, slowing him down, yet sharpened his thinking. Someone stood here for a long time. Su Zhao crouched and pointed at compacted snow beside the note. Their toes pointed toward our carriage, not toward the grain depot. Shinjin did not move too close. He spotted two sets of footprints. One climbed up from the direction of the old tracks. The other descended along the back of the slope. Whoever had been there never walked toward the carriage door, yet had stood observing it. They knew about the red scarf, and knew exactly where to stand for a clear view. A lump of cinder held down the paper. Shinjin pushed the cinder aside with his claw tool. Su Zhao shielded his hands with the camera bag and lifted the sheet out of the snow. It was soaked through, yet its creases were fresh. Torn from the blank reverse side of an old train timetable, it bore only one hastily scrawled line of handwriting, its final character trailing a long ink streak. Do not bring that ticket near the north gate. No identification number. No signature. Shinjin stared at the words. His thoughts jumped first to the 0000 ticket fragment in his travel bag, then to 0792 story about the gray jacket hem. Su Zhao's expression darkened. Who knows we have the ticket aboard this carriage? Knowledge of the gloves and ticket fragment is not confined to people lurking near our carriage. Some of Han Zhao's people under the north gate awning also know about these items. Shinjin flipped the sheet over. Nothing was written on its reverse. This note is not meant to give us answers. It is meant to make us hide what we possess more deeply. Do you believe its warning? I do not trust the note itself. I trust whatever danger it wants us to fear. A sharp metallic clang echoed up from below. Both men spun around. Beneath the north gate awning, guards struck steel pipes 3 times against iron, the recall signal for Zhou Tsin's returning team. Immediately afterwards, a new message popped up on their communications channel. Han Xiao, 6501 has been retrieved. The derelict way house is sealed off. No one is to approach it. Su Zhao slipped the note inside a waterproof pouch and glanced downhill. Zhou Tsin and Ali are coming back from the Wei house. Back to the carriage first. Secure the ticket fragment. Then we go to the awning to see 6501. Su Zhao did not ask why their priorities had shifted. He tucked the waterproof pouch securely away. When they descended toward the awning, a small crowd had already gathered. Han Zhao's men held them back, preventing anyone from crowding around 6501 to badger him about photographs or what had happened behind the grain depot gate. When Shinjin and Su Zhao arrived, 6501 sat on a wooden crate warming his hands. Still young, frost coated his hair and eyebrows. His fingers were deep purple with cold. He held an enamel mug, yet did not bring it to his lips. 4410 pressed a warm scrap of cloth into his arms. Hold on to this. If your fingers suffer frost loss, you will only be able to take photographs from memory. I wasn't trying to take photos. 6501's voice was hoarse. I was too afraid to leave the Wei house. He drew the mug tighter against his chest as though expecting more questions about why he had not run. Half the way, house walls had collapsed. No fresh footprints crossed the snow leading from its doorway toward the grain depot back gate. Hiding inside had felt safe at first, but when he heard sounds outside, terror paralyzed him. He had stretched his camera through a hole in the wall to snap pictures. His hands shook so badly that afterwards he could no longer find his way back to the carriage. Zhou Tsin stood nearby, fresh gray dust smearing his jacket. Ali rolled up her empty coal sack and did not volunteer dramatic details about the rescue. Han Xiao gave Shinjin a short nod. The boy was safely out. Questioning him was Shinjin's choice. What did you hear inside the Wei house? Shinjin asked. 6501's eyelids twitched. 2 people walked past outside first. Then only one set of footsteps remained. I heard steel pipes scraping across snow. I peeked through the hole and saw someone wearing half-length black gloves on their right hand. They knelt beside the pipe and wrapped white cloth around its end. Did you see their face? No. Their back was turned toward me. 6501 gripped his mug tightly. After a long pause, he added quietly, before I left the Wei house, someone called my name. Silence fell over the awning. Who? Su Zhao demanded. My mother, 6501 answered. She died last winter. 4410 gently took the mug away before his numb hands could scald him. He did not cry, nor did he describe how uncannily familiar the voice had sounded. He only stared down at his frost, red knuckles. I did not answer. She kept calling for me, telling me to go out through the Wei house back door. The voice only fell silent just before Zhou Tsin and Ali arrived. Shinjin asked no further questions. The voice calling, "Hey, son," from behind the grain depot gate and the voice of 6,501's dead mother inside the way house echoed across the snow. They might not come from the same source, yet both clearly understood human psychology. Upon hearing the voice of a loved one, instinct often makes people move before they can think. Han Xiao opened the registration log to a blank page and held it towards 6501. The photographs you took earn you one escorted return trip to the carriages. Until North Gate operations resume, you will stay under this awning. You will wait for an escort before attempting to return to your carriage. 6501 picked up the pen but hesitated. Staring at his own identification number on the page, he asked, "May I trade for a cup of hot water?" 4410 replied, "Yes. You will give something in exchange for that cup tomorrow." 6501 nodded and wrote his number neatly onto the register. Chen Jin turned and walked away from the awning. Pain throbbed along his sutured wound. Su Zhao followed a few steps behind and spoke softly. You stopped him before he could say more. He has already told us everything he can. He hasn't told us everything. Chen Jin paused. Su Zhao was not looking at him, his gaze fixed on the distant green paint carriages. But he cannot bring himself to say more right now. There is no point forcing him. Chen Jin leaned on his small hammer and took a few steps forward. Movement pulled sharply at his stitches. He did not look back. When we get back, move the ticket fragment somewhere new. Do not keep it under the biscuits any longer, Su Zhao said. Audit the inventory, as you suggested. Before auditing, move our most easily stolen valuables out of sight. They retraced their path back toward the low slope. Near their carriage, Su Zhao halted. The red tape marker under the handle remained intact, and the scarf had not shifted. Warm yellow light shone quietly from inside the windows. No unexpected silhouettes could be seen. Standing outside the door, Chun Jin's wound pulsed repeatedly. Though he ought to have felt relief that nobody had tampered with their carriage, he stared for a long time at the waterproof pouch in his hand. No name had been written on that note. Yet whoever had left it knew they possessed a ticket they ought never to bring near the North Gate. Back inside the carriage, Chun Jin first pulled out the 0000 ticket fragment wrapped in 2 layers of paper. Moisture from snow had softened the paper. Using his claw tool, he pried loose an old panel beneath the window side seat, pushed clumps of blackened cotton batting aside. He wrapped the ticket fragment in clean plastic sheeting and tucked it deep into the compartment. Su Zhao sat opposite and watched him refit the panel. After Chen Jin screwed its original short fasteners back in place, Su Zhao tore off a short strip of red tape and stuck a thin mark beside one screw. Chen Jin reached toward the tape, but Su Zhao brushed his hand away. Do not touch it. If the tape breaks, we know someone has pried this panel open. Chen Jin said nothing. He stowed the old gloves, gray thread and leftover broken biscuits back inside his travel bag and zipped it closed. Inside the carriage, it was marginally warmer. The half-coal brick still sat beside the fuel compartment, its corners worn smooth from handling. Neither of them had placed it into the stove. Overhead, the public address system crackled to life. Time remaining until train departure, 1 hour. All passengers must return to their assigned carriages. Passengers not in position will be denied boarding. For a heartbeat, the communications channel fell quiet, then erupted. People asked whether carriage doors would seal automatically. Some wanted to board carrying coal. Others sent repeated location markers, begging for guides back toward the tracks. The sound of steel pipes striking metal drifted over through blowing snow from beneath the North Gate awning. Su Zhao lifted his head. 6501 is still under the awning. Han Xiao will arrange transport for him. He earned an escorted return with his photographs, Su Zhao pointed out. Conditions under the awning are chaotic. Anyone without coal, without connections, and who cannot locate their own carriage will end up at the very back of the queue. Chen Jin glanced toward the coal brick beside the fuel compartment. That small brick would not burn for long, yet it represented their most tangible source of warmth aboard. Only yesterday they had shared tiny crumbs of biscuit, and now they contemplated trading precious fuel to secure safe passage for a boy they barely knew. You stay and guard the carriage. He picked up his hammer. Su Zhao blocked his path. Why always me? My leg is injured, which makes it all the more sensible for me to go. Su Zhao hung binoculars across his chest. We both go. You negotiate with Han Xiao. I keep watch toward the north. If anyone approaches this carriage while we are gone, I cannot see them from inside. Chen Jin studied him for a moment, pressed the scarf securely back into the door gap, and nodded. Very well. We go to the awning and clarify arrangements for 6501's return. We will get involved in no further searches for Gray hat around the grain depot. Chaos surrounded the awning. People crowded against the canvas walls. Some held empty coal sacks shouting that they had not yet received their allocation. Others carrying oxygen canisters demanded to know when the second group would depart. Guards held steel pipes horizontally to hold the surging crowd back. Han Xiao stood beside the stove, his voice raw from shouting. 2 return convoys will depart from the north gate. Those carrying coal leave in the first group. The injured and those without coal go in the second. Anyone straying from the designated path after leaving this awning bears full responsibility for their fate. A man in a gray cotton jacket, speaking on 6,501's behalf, pushed forward through the throng. Where does 6501 stand? He took those photographs. You promised him an escort. Second group, Han Xiao replied. When will the second group leave? Once the first group has returned. The man in gray prepared to press further, but Chen Jin spotted 6,501 huddled behind wooden crates. He clutched the registration log against himself, enamel mug resting on the snow-covered ground. His purple, tinged fingers clung tightly to the log's edge. Amid all the shouting, he made no attempt to push forward or remind people of his photographs. He only glanced nervously toward the northern snow-covered road before dropping his gaze again. Chen Jin walked over to Han Xiao. He drew the half-coal brick from inside his coat, thumb resting against its most intact edge, and glanced towards Su Zhao. 1/4 of this coal brick, in exchange for letting 6501 join the first departure group, Chen Jin said. Our carriage will grow colder as a result. Su Zhao stared at the coal brick, lips pressed tight. Outside, the awning people argued furiously over lumps of coal, while 6,501 cowered behind crates, afraid even to take one small step forward. Su Zhao adjusted the strap of his binoculars across his shoulder. Make the trade. Do not leave him stranded at the very end of the line. Chen Jin pried loose a coal brick and set it onto the wooden crate. It landed with a dull thud, and 6,501 lifted his head at the sound. Use this to buy him a spot, Chen Jin said to Han Xiao. Han Xiao glanced at the coal, then at 6501. This chunk buys him a place on the first convoy only. If something goes wrong on the road, no refunds. I understand. 6501 suddenly stood up. I can wait for the second batch. Chen Jin did not turn around. No one knows when the second batch will ever come back. But that's your coal. It is. Chen Jin stuffed the rest of the coal brick back inside his coat. I'm not buying a thank you. You saw the steel pipes and black gloves. Stay alive and come back. Tell us exactly what you saw. 6,501's Adam's apple bobbed. His earlobes burned bright red from the cold. He hugged the register tighter. Chen Jin had already shoved his hands into his pockets, giving him no chance to voice his gratitude. Su Zhao spoke up then. Zhotsen's leading the first group, right? Han Xiao nodded. Put 6501 right behind Zhotsen. Not at the very back, Su Zhao said. He's freezing bad. If he falls behind, you might not hear him. Han Xiao shot Su Zhao a look, then called Zhotsen over. After hearing the arrangement, Zhotsen simply tucked 6,501's register inside his own coat. Stay close to me. If you hear someone calling your name again, pinch my arm first. Don't turn around. 6,501's face went pale. He nodded, lifting his hand halfway before letting it drop, as though he dared not touch Zhotsen's cotton jacket. Just then, Su Zhao swung his binoculars away from the north and lowered his voice. Someone's coming. A dozen steps outside the rain shelter stood a man in a gray cotton padded coat. His hat was pulled low over his eyes. His right hand hung empty at his side, and in his left he carried a cloth sack. He did not push into the crowd. He merely stood in the snow, watching Chen Jin, as if he had known Chen Jin would be here all along. The man with the low, pulled hat spoke first. Chen Jin. Chen Jin said nothing. The man did not draw nearer. He set the sack down on the snow, stepped back 2 paces, and walked past the overturned truck. One of the guards moved to give chase, but Han Xiao held him back. The man vanished into the snowy mist until not even his silhouette remained. Don't touch it with your hands, Chen Jin told the guard. The guard pried open the sack with a steel pipe. A scrap of gray fabric peeked out, alongside half an old ticket softened by melting snow. Faded zeros ran along its edge. Han Xiao looked up at Chen Jin. Yours? No, Chen Jin replied. His own ticket was still tucked behind the seat divider in his vehicle. He had no idea where this half-ticket had come from. Yet whoever had left the sack knew exactly where to find him, and knew that those 4 zeros would make him stop. The loudspeaker crackled to life once more. 45 minutes until train departure. Han Xiao handed the sack to the guard. Seal this away. No one touches it. He nodded towards 6501. Add him to the first group. We leave in 10 minutes. 6501 pressed his enamel mug into Zhotsen's hands and hastily tucked his frost-numbed fingers into his sleeves. Zhou grumbled about how fussy he was being, yet hung the mug on the outside of his own coal sack rather than making 6,501 carry it. Chen Jin turned toward the train car. Su Zhao followed behind him. Stepping out from under the rain shelter, Su Zhao glanced back. 6501 had joined the first group line. Standing 2 people away, Zhou kept a grip on the back of his collar so he would not get jostled apart by the crowd. If coal burns too fast, Su Zhao said, you'll be the one going out to find more next time. Chen Jin slipped his small hammer back behind his waist. Fine. You hold down the vehicle then. Steel pipes banged against the north gate as people carrying coal began lining up for the first departure. As Chen Jin and Su Zhao walked back, neither looked again at the scrap of gray fabric or the half-ticket on the wooden crate. The guard had covered both items with an iron box, a damp strip of gray fabric trapped beneath its lid.